Day extravaganza stitch and bitch, where we're going to do what I think is a more useful thing to do with Valentine's Day, which is get creative and talk about fun medievalist stuff together. Because I've had a crazy 24 hours of discovery that I'm going to be sharing with you while I continue to work on attaching the trim to my gamora. So what I'm working on today is I'm continuing to attach the trim to, and I'll put it in the working camera here so you can see more up close. I'm attaching the trim to the neckline of my gamora, and I'm going to continue doing that. I settled on a blind stitch, and that actually seems to have been working pretty well. And now I've reached the end of this piece, and now I'm going to be adding a second piece. And yeah, so I've been sort of deciding how it is I'm going to actually attach that joint. Just realized I'm not actually in the camera. Where is your camera? There. Yeah, okay. I'm realizing I'm actually going to looking for higher definition pictures of that for my video on 15th century Irish clothing. And instead, I stumbled across something completely unexpected and completely new, a discovery for me. So fantastic. Oh, thank you, ladies, for letting me know that you can hear me. Yeah, so I've also made some interesting discoveries about historical Valentine's Day practices I'm just going to, historical Valentine's Day practices in the 15th century that are pretty interesting. For those who don't know, great, yay, 3 people can hear me. That's fantastic. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see some familiar faces. And if you're watching, please don't forget to hit that thumbs up. I know, I hate that I have to say that, but I do, and a lot of people forget it, especially if they're watching on their TV. So I've found some interesting Valentine's Day practices that were actually, some of them were new to me, in fact. For those who don't know, the earliest reference to Valentine's, at least that I've been able to find, to Valentine's Day being associated with romantic practices is actually Chaucer's poem, The Parliament of Foulis. I'm actually not certain how the 14th century English is pronounced on the OU area. Thank you, handsome. But yeah.
It still needs to be transferred.
Oh, could you bring the strainer? Oh, okay. Yeah. I'm popping in and out. In what way? Why am I popping in and out? Is that true for everyone? Oh, handsome, could you please turn your computer off?
Yes.
Off. Yeah, I'm going to assume that it's some other device trying to pick up my microphone because, you know, why should my life be easy? In fact, one of the computers I noticed it was on, and I'm going to assume that its Bluetooth is probably trying to pick up my Bluetooth. So, yeah. This Bluetooth is off. That laptop is off. That computer should be off. And all of the smart devices that are near me that have Bluetooth are off. So let me know if I'm still popping in and out. That's kind of annoying. Anyway, the earliest reference I have found to Valentine's Day being celebrated in the Middle Ages as a romantic thing rather than just, you know, a typical Saints' Day feast is Chaucer's Parliament of the Fowls, which he wrote in 1376, I think, presumably, possibly in honor of the anniversary of the betrothal of Richard II with Anne of Bohemia. And it's this long, it's a dream vision poem. It's very much in this story along the lines of Purgatorio or the Commedia. And, you know, the author Chaucer falls asleep and he wakes up and Scipio Africanus, I think, takes him, or Scipio Septimus, one of those two, takes him on a journey, a love journey, where he goes through the the various spheres, the heavens, and they end up at the Parliament of Fowls, where birds are debating love and the virtues of love and how to express love. So if you're ever looking for a kind of medieval English insight into courtly love, the Parliament of Fowls is the read, because they actually go into courtship practices that are acceptable and how to attract a partner and all that sort of thing. Okay, so Mary, you've got popping, but everyone else can hear me just fine. So I'm not certain how that's possible. Not any longer. Okay. Well, let me know if the sound evens out. Try to stick with me, guys. Technology hates me with a passion, and sometimes everything goes perfectly smoothly, and sometimes it just doesn't. So, in the meanwhile, I'll try to keep my hands busy so you at least have something you can watch, even if you can't hear me perfectly. So that's the earliest reference to Valentine's as a romantic, any kind of romantic affiliation. And according to Chaucer, it's the day, St. Valentine's is the day in which every bird finds his mate, but only as is natural. Nature does not force any bird to find a mate if they do not wish it, which I think is an interesting bit of commentary coming from Chaucer. So then the next reference I found in the timeline is in 1400 in Paris, a cour amoureuse, a court of love met, and in Paris, and apparently it was a very sort of a very formal affair in the sense of it had a form. It wasn't an accident, and it wasn't casual. Um, yeah. Okay. Susan has a question. You seem to have turned over the finger braiding and have sewn it down then. Yeah, so I've taken the end of this finger loop braid right here, and actually I'm going to trim a little more of those ends off. And I've just I've folded the end under. Right, I'm trying to figure out where the center of the camera is. Okay, I folded the ends under, and now I'm just tucking them under the finger loop braiding there. And then I'm going to whip stitch that all down. And then I'm going to go back over possibly with a blind stitch, but I'm going to use a whip stitch here because it's a more enveloping stitch than the blind stitch is. It's more brute force, and I kind of need that here. Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't use the trick when I was finger loop braiding this. Trying to figure out where those cameras are. When I was finger loop braiding this, I did not do what I wanted to do, which was actually work with my condottiero to do a two-person situation where he stood very far away from me and we had very long loops. And then he just wound it up on a stick as we braided along, thereby making the really long one, which is what you see if you look in the illuminations of people finger loop braiding. So I didn't do that, so that meant I had to do two braids, and I'm going to have to put a join here. Thankfully, the joint actually lines up with the shoulder seam, so that's actually kind of okay. It's closer, yeah. So back to the topic of Valentine's Day and medieval celebrations of Valentine. So in the court of love in Paris, apparently there was a prince of love who was appointed, and he was, basically a troubadour, and a professional poet. And he apparently came with a whole, appointed is a strong word. I'm not saying he was hired or paid. I don't know about any of that. But he actually would had a whole sort of entourage who would actually recite poetry and play music, and they would dance. And the ladies, they would have to present poetry in honor of the ladies present. And the ladies would actually judge who had composed the best poems, and give them a golden laurel wreath. So that's the next reference to Valentine's Day I had. And we've got a question. Are there different types of finger loop braids? Oh my goodness, yes, there are many. So this one is a chevrons with 8 loops. We have about, I think, 43 from the medieval period. I think we have instructions for 43 different braids. We have them in 2 different manuscripts, basically, not to mention the extant finger loop braids that we've managed to sort of unearth over the decades, from mostly dating through like the 13th to the 15th century. But these manuals are from England, actually. And they have about, between these two 15th century manuals, there's about 43 different braids. Some of them are for 2 people, and one of them is for 3 people. Really complicated. And they come in all kinds of shapes. For you, basically, the maximum number of loops you can have for one person is 8 loops. Well, no, that's not true, because you can double your loops. So you can't really use your thumbs for the loops. You have to actually use your thumbs are involved in manipulating the loops, so you can't put loops on them. But you could probably have up to, I guess, 16 loops if you double looped all of your fingers. Some of the braids actually do have a situation where you've got double loops on certain fingers and single loops on others. Anyway, all sorts of patterns from really, really prosaic. So, just sort of a lace that you would to lace this gown, like this one, actually. Let me see if this even shows up. Yeah, so this is the basic one. This is for 5 loops. And it's literally, this is what I use for lacing up my dresses, right? If I'd done this in 2 colors, then you would actually see a different pattern. It would be kind of hatch marks. But I didn't. I did it in 1 color because I just wanted it to be for lacing. And then there's ones where where it creates multiple layers, where you actually have 2 or 3 layers at a time. You need 2 people to do that. There's other ones where it creates a cool wave going down the center. And I've taught workshops. I teach workshops on this, and I actually have those workshops. I think you can purchase access to them on my website, thecreativecontessa.com. And I actually am planning to launch another set of series of workshops on various skills. So I was going to do some finger loop braiding workshops, via Zoom, so online, so anyone can participate from anywhere in the world, but live. So you join in and you can do it with me. And all kinds of finger loop braids. There's a really cool one that actually makes what looks like piping, and you do it by attaching it to a swivel, a condrac, and it actually creates this cool round loop or round braid that has a spiral going up, a spiral ridge going all the way up it. It's pretty cool. So finger loop braiding can be everything from prosaic all the way through to super, super decorative. And on this channel, I do have a finger loop braid tutorial for one called the Green Dorge, which creates a braid of 3 colors. Makes what would be really pretty edging for the edge of something, or it can also be used as lacing. I've used it for both. So if you do maybe search for finger loop braiding on my channel, you can find that video. Welcome to those who are just joining. If you have any questions, pop them in the live chat. I am paying close attention. I'm also working on attaching the finger loop braiding trim to the neckline of my Gamora here. And I've just finished tucking up a rough edge and the rough edge of the end here. And now I think from here, I'm just going to continue attaching down this side, and then I'll attach the second braid separately rather than continue with the second braid right now. So I'm just going to continue by attaching this side, which is still detached, and we'll see how it turns out. This is the first time I've actually braided with this particular kind of silk yarn, and I really like the dimensionality of it, but it makes it very wiggly when you attach it. So I might end up having to redo some of it if I don't like how it sort of swerves strangely in certain places. We'll see. This is the first time I've made a braid exactly like this one with this kind of yarn. So it's all about exploring, learning by doing. Failures teach more than successes do. So if I have to redo my work, then I have to redo my work. I'm going to have to redo some of the work on this gown anyway, as I discussed in my video on my lessons learned in making this gown. And if I finish attaching this finger loop braiding today, then we'll be moving on to the reconstruction work on this dress. So continuing on the topic of Valentine's Day celebrations in the Middle Ages. So as part of this court of love in the Paris court, apparently it developed into, and I wasn't able to find primary source evidence of this, but I read it from a reputable historian. I've got to go and see if I can find the actual source material for this. But apparently there was this really fun practice in which the courtiers in the French court, so, people of all ranks, peers of the realm, ladies in waiting, all of them, there would be a kind of a raffle where you would actually draw names for the person who was going to be your Valentine for the next year. And this was absolutely a courtly love. So probably not actually involving anything more than flirtation and poetry, but who knows? Um, anyway, the idea was that you would draw this person's name and they would be, and I think it was the men drawing women's names. I don't think it was both directions, but I have to find more details for certain men drawing women's names because Charles d'Orléans, Count, the who got captured during the Battle of Agincourt and lived in the Tower of London for 25 years, he had a Valentine. And so I know that he chose one for certain, chose a name. And basically for the next year, the gentleman at the very least would write poetry in honor of their Valentine, and they would dance together and do things like this, right? It was a very, very formal experience. But I thought that could be a very fun sort of practice to reinvigorate for those of us who are doing living history. If you are part of a living history company, that could be, a fun way to explore medieval creativity and in a safe social environment, medieval flirtation. Are courts of love popular at medievalist events? I obviously can't speak for all events worldwide because I only go to a few a year, honestly. So I can't say, I don't know. I can say that in the SCA, they don't happen very often. I think they used to happen more often back in the 80s. They seem to have died out. I think I saw there was an event in Ireland, an SCA event in Ireland that was this last weekend, actually, that was going to be, or this weekend, that was called itself Court of Love. I don't know how much they're actually pursuing the official Court of Love activities. But, there's a lot of, a lot of these practices are just sort of, a lot of the research is just coming to light about them, even though the Victorians actually did a lot of research along these lines, but a lot of that kind of got forgotten in dusty archives. So what cloth is this? This cloth, this is wool. It's a twill. So it's a nice pink twill wool, and that's a linen. The lining is a linen. And it's lined in blue, which is actually a practice there's an extant 16th century gown, Italian gown from like the 1540s, I think, that actually is lined in blue linen. And I just happen to have blue linen scraps that fit this. So that's why I decided to apply a practice that might post-date this gown, but was definitely used within 50 years of this gown. And using the blue linen. And actually linen is actually relatively easy to dye blue. Apparently it's one of the dye stuffs that will take relatively easily without a lot of goading, unlike other dye stuffs that the linen will just basically reject outright. Comment, I realized this afternoon I had no garters for an event in the morning and spent the past 2 hours 7-loop braiding in 2 colors, a new set. Oh, very nice. I have also used the 7-loop technique to make garters. For that one, I think I quadrupled the loops. No, I doubled the loops because I wanted them to be extra wide enough to be really comfortable as garters. So I actually doubled every single loop for the 7-loop braid, and that actually made a pretty decently wide garter. Yeah, I've done that. What is the most expensive color and why? Kermes red. Oh, okay. Well, so it depends on the period. By the 15th century, Kermes red, what you would become the word crimson in English, was absolutely hands down the most expensive color. Kermes is a louse that grows on oak trees, grows. Wow, that sounds like a plant. It's an animal. It inhabits oak trees in climates like the Mediterranean. And it produces that amazing red that you see depicted by artists in 15th century art, especially often on hosen. So from the 14th to the 15th century and 16th century, crimson, absolutely the most expensive color, followed closely by black, by the way, because to get black, you have to do a lot of over-dyeing, and the repeated over-dyeing gets expensive. But in terms of actual, like the dye stuff itself, Kermes, 100%. You could achieve red with madder and Brazil wood, but neither of those produce the same rich shade that Kermes produces. Kermes, as far as I know, is basically extinct. Last I read, because it got basically hunted to death. The next thing that's a relative of it is cochineal, which is from Mexico, is a New World louse of. It's a relative, but the red is not quite the same as Kermes red. Even though it is actually a more concentrated dye, it doesn't produce quite the same red. So yeah, that's why red was the most expensive color in the 15th century. Now, up until about 1204, and that date is specific on purpose, the most expensive dye stuff was Tyrian purple, made from the murex, the little shell little shellfish in the Eastern Roman Empire. And that's because the processing for murex, it took 10,000 murex snails to produce, like, I'm trying to remember what it was, an ounce of dye stuff or something like that, an absolutely insane quantity. And to extract the dye from murex, you have to drill into the shells, pull out the little snails, plop them all in a vat, and then let it ferment. And yeah, it's one hell of a process. But apparently, when the Franks invaded their ally, Constantinople, in 1204 and sacked the city, the dye factories, the dye production centers for Tyrian purple were abandoned, and they never managed to make critical mass to resume production. So that was kind of the end of Tyrian purple, was 1204. And it was a secret that they held, and no one else knew how to do it. And I guess no one else thought that they should try. So I used Eowyn de Weaver's skills and doubled up each loop for extra width and red. Oh yeah, right. Yep. Doubled up each, exactly. Talking about this 7-loop braid, doubling up each loop for X. Yep. That's what I did as well. And I actually found that the process of doubling up loops is entirely authentic, even though I started doing it a long time ago just as a way to make my braids thicker. It actually was a real honest-to-God practice. There is an extant braid from Estonia from the 14th century, braid of 5 loops, where each loop is actually 4. They quadrupled it to make it extra thick. I just realized this needs to come down. Sorry, guys. Okay, there we go. That's better. Let me see. I'm having you drop a third of every sentence. I'm going to try dropping out and back in. Okay, is anyone else having the same sound issues? There seems to be really random. Some people seem to be having issues with the sound and others don't, and that's really strange. So let me know if everyone else, if you're having sound issues, let me know. Or if you're not having sound issues, let me know, because it'll be interesting from my perspective. Nope. I can hear you great. Okay, that's fun. Well, then I guess it's not on my end. Sorry. How did Alexander the Great have a purple cloak? Because he predates 1204 by about 1,500 years. Yeah, Alexander the Great is 4th century BC. Tyrian purple was absolutely a going concern in that era. So that's how he had a purple cloak, because murex dyeing was still an ongoing thing. In fact, I think I remember an archaeological find in Israel, maybe, but it might have been one of the other former Crusader states along the coast. They actually found a trove of 10,000 murex shells, all sort of together, and they all had holes drilled in them. And they were pretty certain that came from, or not holes drilled in them, they had holes in them, not drilled in them, little tiny holes. But those were not the holes from extracting the dyeing. Those were holes from the stress of having too many murex snails in one small space for breeding for the purposes of dyeing. And so what ended up happening is the stress of those living conditions actually caused the murex snails to cannibalize each other. And so those little holes in the shells were actually from the murex feeding on each other. Yeah. My sound issues were solved by closing and reopening the app. Ah, good. Okay, garters were often knitted. That's where the garter stitch came from. I actually have zero evidence of garters being knitted in the 14th or 15th century. So if you have evidence of that, that's pretty cool. But I don't. The only knitted items I have evidence of are socks from that period. And it seems that maybe at the end of the 15th century, at the end of the 15th century, they were absolutely starting to knit caps, especially in England, particularly. And they don't start really knitting stockings in most of Europe until the 16th century, but there does seem to be maybe some evidence of knitted stockings having been accessible for purchase in Italy in the later 15th century. It was something that was being done in Spain for certain. Anyway, so I actually don't have any. I don't have any evidence of garters having been knitted in the 15th century, but I'm always open to evidence of that. Okay. Was the medieval period the time people started exchanging small gifts for Valentine's Day, especially flowers? So that is a good question. Flowers. So I don't know about Valentine's Day per se. Valentine's Day itself seems to have been more about the poetry in medieval practice and the choosing of your Valentine for the next year in the case of France. I do know that the exchange of gifts between lovers had been going on for all since at least the 12th century in the Middle Ages, when the courts of love really started up during the troubadour, the golden age of the troubadours in Aquitaine, right? And that's when we get the first manual of courtly love by Andreas Capellanus, and he prescribes. Well, he has some very interesting things to say about love, but in particular, he actually describes what are acceptable gifts between lovers, which presumably you would give to your Valentine, but I actually cannot, I have no evidence, I haven't found evidence of a gift being given in particular on Valentine's Day. But the kinds of gifts that were given were actually objects, not so much flowers. So remember that there weren't really, flowers weren't grown in the way that flowers are grown now in hothouses in quantities where you could just go and get some from the flower vendor. That wasn't a thing. Flowers were more wild. And while there were gardens and there would be gardens with flowers in them, it wasn't of the quantity that you could just go and wholesale strip them for your Valentine's Day flower supply. Flowers also had a symbolic meaning in the Middle Ages, and there's a whole language of flowers, and you can see that language of flowers. It's in Shakespeare especially, and when Ophelia's lost her mind because of everything horrible that's happened to her, and she's going off with her statement about and that's rue, that's for I forget what she said rue was, but that whole speech she gives is about the secret language of flowers, and she's actually, Shakespeare through her is communicating some of the things that have probably happened to her to help her get to that state of mental instability through the language of flowers. So um, most likely, a flower singular would have been. Apparently that microphone died. Yep, not muted. Sound gone because of the microphone. Okay, what was the last thing you all heard? Because I was giving some really good information there. Oh, giving of flowers singular. Okay, great, thank you. So giving of flowers singular. Um, was that after I talked about Ophelia and her mad rant and what it was actually communicating? Yeah, sound is back because I replaced the microphone. Yeah, this one. I didn't check that this one was actually almost dead. So there we go. Apologize, everyone. Thank you for sticking with it. Yeah, so the kinds of gifts that were given were objects and useful objects, objects that you could wear on your person. So, and that makes it extra intimate because this is something that you will then keep on your body in some way and will be in some way maybe even against your skin depending on the gift. So the gift, nope, this is this is mid 15th century, what you are seeing. Sorry, the question was, hello, are you from the 1600s? I'm not. This is solidly 15th century. Yeah, so gifts included garters, belts, garters being the thing that holds up your stockings, right? Just realized I'm not wearing stockings, so I can't show you garters. I didn't finish actually getting dressed this morning. So yeah, garters for your stockings to hold them up or to keep them tight around your leg. Sorry, I just realized I'm completely out of the camera here. Belts, shoes, stockings, rings, and brooches, also pendants that you would pin onto your clothing. You look great for 600 years old. Why, thank you. I feel great for 600 years old. So yeah, those are the kind of gifts that are prescribed as being given between lovers. And if you actually start looking at things like medieval combs, especially, you're going to notice there's a lot of heavy love, a lot of love imagery that's carved into them pretty heavily. So yeah, you can actually see that as being a practice. That this comb was made specifically to be given to a lover. So yeah, a singular flower might have been given, but it would have been very carefully chosen based on the language of flowers. Also, that was the question. Yeah, flowers. I'm actually not certain when the practice of giving flowers en masse, as a large bouquet actually commenced. If you look at portraits, medieval portraits, you'll also see, especially 15th century and early 16th century portraits. If you look in the sitter's hand, you might actually see a flower in it, and that flower has meaning. That wasn't put there for funsies, and it's possible the sitter wasn't even holding the flower. The artist added it as per the instructions from their employer, from the person commissioning the painting, the patron, right? Okay, so I was going to share my exciting discovery. Such an exciting discovery. Wow. Okay, so I started to talk about it and then we got off on the sound, so I'll repeat it. I was trawling the internet this morning, as I do, for higher quality pictures of the Moy gown, which is a possibly medieval Irish gown that was excavated from a bog, might date to the 14th century, might date to the 15th century, might date to the 16th or 17th. They haven't dated it yet, but it looks like it's from the 14th century. Anyway, I was looking for higher resolution pictures for my video on 15th century Irish fashion, and I stumbled across an amazing find. So, I'll get to the comment on knitted stockings in a minute. Anyway, this amazing find is that in 2019, in the Cathedral of Segovia, they were conducting restoration works on one of the tombs, and they opened the tomb and they found a velvet-covered coffer that contained the bones of Prince Pedro Enriquez, the son of Enrique II, the first Trastamara king of Castile. And not only were the little prince's bones in there, but his clothing was as well. And his clothing was so well preserved and is so well preserved. When I saw this picture, I thought it was anything but what it was. I thought it was some 19th century creation. I mean, it was so well preserved. But as I decided to look into it more closely, I did a reverse Google image search on this picture I found. And yeah, the clothing dates to 1366, when unfortunately little Prince Pedro fell out of the window of the castle in Segovia, the Alcazar. sort of the fortress castle that was in the city, and he fell to his death, sadly. He was buried in his clothing, though, and the clothing, as so much Spanish clothing does, survived really well. So we actually have what is, in essence, a mid 14th century coat, COTE. Some of you might call it a cote hardie, but that's a debatable term. Anyway, and it's so well, all the stitches are preserved, the buttons are preserved, so much of it is the techniques, the way it's constructed, absolutely amazing. And I found some high resolution photos, and I've shared those. If any of my patrons or channel members are out there, I've shared them with you for you get your first look at them. I was so excited to find this because not only was his coat, COTE, in there, but there was also this interesting overgarment, this full kind of gown-like overgarment that had made of beautiful silk brocade and has these really intricately wrought loops for buttons and some of the buttons as well for the front closure. And it really looks like so much. You can definitely see the influence between the Middle Eastern styles, between the Arab style, sort of the kaftan style, and then the coat that's underneath. So you really get the idea of just how multicultural, what a melting pot medieval Spain was in terms of fashion and culture. So I'm excited. I just found those pictures this morning, and now I've been digging around trying to find the report, the detailed report on the garments, because I want to know what stitches are used. I want to know about the weaving. I want to know if they've analyzed it for dye stuff. I did read that one thing I did find in my cursory look while I was actually getting ready to do this morning. One of the things I definitely found is that the dye stuff, it's yellow, it's a gold and blue brocade, so a blue ground with gold woven into it. And the blue shows indigotine, which is like the blue dye stuff that is in indigo, but it's also the blue dye stuff that's in woad. And unfortunately, you can't really tell the difference chemically between the two. In the 14th century, it could kind of go either way because of the trade connections between, the Iberian Peninsula and the Middle East. I kind of think it's probably more likely woad, though, in the 14th century, but that's just me. So this is, the list of extant garments is not for fashions in Southern Europe is not terribly big. We have a lot of bog finds, right? But it's always exciting when I find something from Southern Europe, because we have so many fewer things from the 14th and 15th century for those parts of the world than we do from the boggy parts of Europe. And every single garment we find is another glimpse into our sartorial past, and that's exciting to me anyway. So, yeah, we all know what kind of a geek I am. Oh, yeah. So I will be continuing that avenue of research. The comment is knitted stockings 15th century and later. Yeah, so I don't have any evidence of knitted stockings in the early 15th century. For me, the only evidence I can find, and it's like secondary, it's not even primary, are references to knitted stockings having possibly been exported from Spain into Italy, into the Italies at the end of the 15th century. I will say that the inventories don't talk about knitted stockings. None of the Italian inventories I've looked at, or any other inventories I've looked at in all of Europe, have talked about knitted stockings, nor have expense accounts talked about. I haven't found expense accounts with payments to knitters either. So I'm always interested in primary source evidence for this. Which article? It's one of those interesting things. We have evidence, especially in Spain. Most of the extant knitting, not nail binding, knitting that we have is from Spain. And in Spain, you've got knit pillowcases, really intricate ones, by the way. You've got knit hats. There's all kinds of knit garments that have survived in Spain from the Middle Ages, and there's plenty of evidence there. Then, of course, in the 16th century, suddenly knitting explodes all over Europe to a major degree. Now, I know about knitters' guilds and whatnot, but they don't seem to be doing very much in the way. They seem to be doing hats mostly. At that point, the one, you put a link. Oh, sorry, Mary. So unfortunately, YouTube has dumped the link. yeah, that's the way it goes. If you have me on social media, I'm on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok. If you don't mind looking for me there and sending me a message with the article, that'll be great. Yeah, unfortunately, yeah, YouTube. Yeah, no, I'm excited about any research that could pinpoint earlier applications of knitting. That's always exciting to me. Yeah, it's one of those things. We have all of these in the 15th century. You start seeing a lot of knitting Madonnas, um, and she's knitting a shirt, but that's kind of based on this apocryphal tale, um, and it's very interesting. Appreciate it, Mary. Thank you. Joshua says, so I was reading an article earlier. Bog bodies were found in Titusville, Florida, called the Wendover bog bodies. They were carbon dated to 8,000 years ago, complete with Native American clothing. Yes, I had heard about that as well. And I haven't had a chance, I keep coming across these discoveries in the middle of looking for something else. And I keep saying, I'm going to come back to this. And then I just never get back to it. Yeah, did you read, were there any details in the article about the clothing? Like, was it woven? Was it hides? Was it, um, I only heard someone mention it, and the Wendover bodies, and I haven't actually gotten to look into that in any more detail. I mean, yeah, 8,000-year-old clothing. Wow, that would be fast. That would be fantastic. It's sort of like Ötzi, the Iceman, who was found by skiers in Switzerland. Who was preserved in the ice for thousands of years, and his clothes are perfectly preserved. Well, so is his body, pretty much, including the contents of his stomach, and his tattoos. But his clothing was also perfectly preserved, and that's 7,000-year-old to 5,000 BC. So 7,000-year-old clothing. That's super exciting. I mean, I'm sorry that he probably died a pretty unpleasant death, having been shot in the chest with an arrow and just left for dead up there in the mountains, but in the Ice Age, no less. But on the other hand, it works out for fashion historians. Yeah, history is fascinating. I wish that teachers were allowed to teach history differently. I think a lot more people would be more interested in history if it wasn't taught as a series of battles and dates, but was taught from the perspective of this is how people lived. And yeah, there was this battle that happened in 1066, but this is how they actually fought it, and this is what they were wearing, and this is what they were eating, and these are the kind of infections they caught, right? That makes it real for people. Just saying there was a battle in 1066 that supposedly shaped the course of European history, whatever. Most people won't be interested by that. But if you bring it to make it visceral, make it palpable for them, then they get interested. If you tell the story part of history, then it gets interesting. Hides and woven. Yeah, okay. So yes, Joshua says the 8,000-year-old Wendover bog bodies were found with brooches, combs, and other grave goods with different types of clothing. So 6,280 BC, a date I didn't ever expect I'd say aloud. Um, and apparently wearing hides and woven textiles. That is super awesome. Wow, that's pretty cool. How well preserved were they? Did the article say? Like, some bog finds, it's like they just went into the ground, like the Sligo bog body, um, from Killary. The Killary, called referred to as the Killary coat incorrectly, I think, but it's from Killary in Ireland, in County Sligo, and it really looks like the man just died yesterday. That's how well preserved those garments are. And then there's other times where they're not so well preserved. It depends on the conditions of the bog. Not all bogs are the same. It depends on how acidic the bog is. It depends on just how anaerobic it is, the specific composition. So different bogs produce different preservative results, I guess is the point. I'm not hating this so far, the way this is turning out. Yeah, it's not too bad. We'll see what happens when I actually put it on and see how it really sits, and then I decide if I have to redo anything. I am my own worst enemy. Okay. Said some were preserved with hair and skin, others were bones, and it was an organized community cemetery. Very neat. That's pretty cool. Yes, some of these bog bodies, I mean, the bodies themselves look like they just fell asleep yesterday, except that they have no bones in many cases, especially in Ireland, because the kind of bogs that they have in Ireland apparently dissolve the bones but preserve all of the soft tissue perfectly. So you end up with this really, it's kind of like human bag. um, but yeah, if you ever get to Ireland, you must go to the National Museum in Dublin and visit the Bog Body exhibition. It is uncanny. Joshua says the men, women, and children were all separated into different areas. Oh, that is interesting. You know, that used to be a practice in the 19th century at least, that especially babies who died and small children were buried in a separate section of the cemetery. The babies were possibly buried in a separate section because they died especially stillbirths, because they unfortunately, probably some people believe they were going to purgatory because they died unbaptized. Ah, the bad old days. History isn't all puppies and flowers. So yeah, I'm really super excited about all of these recent finds, and now I'm adding to my exploration pile the Wendover bog bodies. God, I almost feel like I should do just a video just specifically on bog bodies and their value for material history. Could do easily a whole series on that. Let's see. Susan says there's treasure found in what was an English fen. There's treasure found in what was English fen country. Yeah, brooches, etc. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Let me tell you, muckraking or metal detecting in England can be a really rewarding pastime, because you are very likely, any given place you go, you are very likely to find medieval or ancient treasures, jewelry, etc. And for the most part, you get to keep it. I think there's some clause in England that if the museum offers to buy it at a market price, then you like have to sell it, I think, maybe, but you don't, yeah, you at least get compensated for it, or you can just keep it because they have a lot. there was a lot of hoarding happening in the first millennium because of all of the migratory peoples, all of them, or later on the not so migratory but raiding peoples of a Norse persuasion. And so people would just take their hordes of coins and treasures and they would bury them under the understanding that they were going to come back from them. And they often didn't get back to them. Hence, we have all these hordes of amazingly preserved metalwork. Yeah, the unexpected side effect of living a scary life of transience in the face of invaders. Good for history, bad for the people living through it. So yeah, let's see. What else did I have on the docket to discuss today? Oh, the Valentine, the earliest Valentine letter that has been preserved in English. Because actually the earliest Valentine letter that is preserved that I know of is actually in French by Charles d'Orléans. I did mention him. He was captured he was Count of Orleans. He was captured, so he's a peer of France. He was captured at the Battle of Agincourt and brought back to London as a hostage. And I didn't have a chance to look into why no one paid his ransom for 25 years, but he literally spent the next 25 years in England, so long that he learned to speak Middle English fluently. And he composed so many poems while he was there as a guest at the Tower of London. And by the way, he wasn't in prison. He was living a comfy life in the residential part of the tower, not in some oubliette. Anyway, he apparently composed so many poems that the British Library now has a large collection of his poetry in the original manuscript form, because he was living there while he composed them, and they ended up in the royal collection. So but he actually writes a kind of letter, a kind of poem, in which he basically apologizes to his Valentine. He says he can't be there. And probably he says that because he's trapped in London and no one has paid his ransom. And I wasn't able to find out why after 25 years. I guess it would have been Edward the Fourth, maybe. Think about that. No? No, maybe Henry the Sixth might have let him go. Like, why? Why was he released after 25 years? Did someone finally pay the ransom? That's a little known aspect of medieval warfare amongst the aristocracy. They intentionally tried not to kill fellow aristocrats and knights because that was the way you made your money in war. The ransom that you could collect from capturing alive a nobleman or a knight, a well accoutred knight, was pretty significant. So you don't want to kill each other. You just want to sort of lightly maim each other and capture each other. And that's an aspect of medieval warfare that definitely goes away by the second half of the 15th century when you see the rise of sort of these peasant units, the Landsknecht and their ilk, especially with the rise of the increase in mercenary forces. But that being said, the mercenaries in Italy in the Middle Ages, the condottieri, they particularly tried not to kill people and not to get themselves killed and not to get their people killed because people were expensive. So even they were trying not to wreak too much violence and death, at least on each other of equal rank. Let's see. Needle making is definitely an interesting topic, especially when it's before the 1700s where needles started to be machine made. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting the transition in needle making from bone to metal, and how that transition can really impact the kinds of things you can make and the kinds of fabrics that you can sew, because if you have a big bulky bone needle and you poke that through your 15th century woven silk damask, it's going to leave a hole that may or may not really close up very well. So yeah, needle making is a very interesting thing. They've actually found in the Thames mud, they've actually found tools for needle making, 14th and 15th century tools for needle making, specifically the 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 wooden block with a divot where you would actually use the divot to help shape the needle and sharpen it. Yeah, so it is these aspects, these little nitty-gritty details that help us get a better picture of medieval life are really what fascinate me. I mean, I'm happy to learn dates and battles as a way to frame medieval material culture, but really I'm much more interested in the material culture than the dates. Maybe provision of Margaret of Anjou's marriage contract for Henry VI. Oh, Susan is saying that that might be why they released Charles d'Orléans, because when she married when Margaret of Anjou was betrothed to Henry VI, that may have been a provision of that marriage contract. That's a good point, actually. That's a good point. That might well be true. Yeah, it's interesting. It's always fascinating. Now, what is fascinating to me is how history could have turned out differently, especially with Margaret of Anjou and Henry VI. If she had actually managed to win the war she was waging and hold the Lancastrian lines, just how massively different history would be. Because if she had held out and the Lancastrians had won, there would have been no Henry VIII. There would possibly be no Church of England. I mean, the way that would have changed the course of history is immense. Just that one battle. Just absolutely crazy. Hi, I managed to finish the other day the structured Journea. What an experience. Oh, it's Ardens. Ardens, welcome. Obviously sadly you can't post pictures in the chat. But yeah, if you can get me, if you want to share pictures with me, find me on the usual places, Instagram or Facebook or whatever, TikTok, whatever. What are your thoughts are you happy with how it's turned out? Or the things you're going to change? Having done a structured jornea myself before, it can be an experience. Did you, and you said you did not, you decided not to go with the padding. Did you go with some kind of lining? I know I'm asking a lot of questions. Dish, 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 dish. It's very cool though. I'm excited to see the pictures. Yeah, we are currently working on the table that I can see, but you can't across the room. We are currently, I'm sorry, I keep getting away from the camera, the sewing camera. We are currently working on a new farsetto, a new arming farsetto, although it can be used for civilian purposes too, because that's how they were. But it will be reinforced so that it can be used for arming. For my condottiero, we had some fitting issues that I had to resolve. For those of you who are patrons or members, I've already posted the raw footage of those fitting, the fitting process with some tips and tricks. So if you want to go ahead and check out what we're doing, how the process is going on that, you can go ahead. I don't know when we'll get when we'll get part 1 of the finished vlog done. There's a lot of things already on the docket at the moment, but we are putting up the raw footage for our curious patrons and members who just want to check that out. And we had some fitting issues, but it was a common fitting issue, and it had to do with the arm's eye and it being it pouching out, and I showed exactly how you can fix that when that happens. It's a pretty easy technique, and it works most of the time. And it applies to both men's and women's clothing. Let me see. Back to the jornea. I like it. It fits perfectly, and the fullness of the velvet makes padding redundant, so no need for it in the end. Awesome. Yeah, definitely. Some of those really textured 3-dimensional fabrics, they don't necessarily need it. And, especially if you're living in a really warm climate, why would you want to do that to yourself if you don't need it for the look? And let me see. I hope the combination of linen and cotton velvet makes it breathable enough. I mean, it will be better than than silk, although ironically, wool breathes better than cotton does, in my experience. Obviously, it depends on the weave of your wool. Don't, if you're using freeze or something like that, it's not going to breathe terribly wonderfully. But depending, like this wool, the wool here in this gown breathes perfectly, especially in combination with the linen. It is such a comfortable garment for tropical climates. And I know none of you are expecting me to say that, but I'm going to say it again. Super comfy. But it's a medium weave. It's neither super tight nor super loose. So it can breathe. It hasn't been fulled or felted. Well, fulled into being practically felt, I guess I should say. Let's see. And in regards to the English history, I think there would have not been an English church if Henry VIII didn't pursue his obsession with a male heir. Well, yeah, that also. I mean, he was named the defender of the church until he decided, and he had lots of really not nice things to say about Martin Luther until the Pope said, yeah, you can't actually divorce Catherine of Aragon. Sorry. And yeah. You can't actually throw your wife away like that. Yeah, I agree. But I mean, that's sort of an obvious one. Tracing back the history that kind of put us on the trajectory for Henry VIII is really interesting to me. I always entertain myself with thoughts of what if. And because I teach English lessons professionally also as a second, that's a good way to learn certain structures, certain semantic and grammatical structures that are very handy. What would have happened if this had not happened, for instance? Learning the conditional forms. Yeah, I'm really excited. I'm really happy that your jornea turned out well. That's really cool. Did you end up pleating in a separate panel into a yoke, or did you just go from forming the pleats from the drape of the fabric? And in the meanwhile, while I wait for Ardens to hopefully reply, if you're just joining, please don't forget to hit that thumbs up. Thank you so much for joining our little Valentine's Day Stitch and Bitch and Sip. And if you have any questions or comments, just pop them in the live chat. I am also happy to answer questions about medieval living history, about medieval material culture. You know, my specialty is 15th century, but I have definitely branched out into other eras. And I live in Korea and know a lot about Korean medieval history also, and Korean historical fashion. So feel free to pop anything into the chat. We have been discussing Valentine's Day practices in the Middle Ages and also sort of love practices in general. So if you have questions about that, feel free to ask. Arden says he made a yoke and a separate piece for the pleats. It was the obvious course of action as well as the easy way for me. I mean, yeah, it's definitely going to be the easiest way to do a structured jornea for certain. And I will say that there is evidence of both. There is evidence of structured pleats coming from just the drape of a full panel. And there's also, I have seen some pretty convincing visual evidence of a yoke. It'd be nice if we found an extant garment with a yoke. That would be super cool. Diego de Cavanillas does not have a yoke, interestingly. And yet it was also still a structured jornea. So his is the more challenging one for certain. Sort of, it really captures just how advanced tailoring techniques were in the 15th century, garments like that. Susan says, I always imagine Charles V looking Don Corleone at the Pope when he was making the decision about Catherine Catherine of Aragon's divorce. Yeah, for certain. Because yeah, you're right. Charles V, that was his aunt. It was his auntie. Joshua says, I'm really surprised you teach English. I would have imagined that you are a history teacher, to be honest. My sister teaches English in Korea as well. It's just one of the many hats I wear. I, I haven't really, yeah, it's funny. When I was in 8th grade, I was identified as most likely to be a history professor. Even back in 8th grade, my peers I acknowledged that about me. And I started university studying history, and then I realized that academia is a shit show, and it's a mean place. And why would I want to do that to myself? Um, so I have a gift for languages too. So I actually, until the machines ate my profession, I was a professional translator, because honestly, until recently, being a professional translator was a much more easily monetizable career set than history. But yeah, the machines have literally eaten my profession. And I was a damned good translator, by the way, because I have a gift for gab and I'm good at wordsmithing. So my combination ability to learn and master foreign languages, combined with my ability to compose in my own language, meant that I was a damned good translator. But that is absolutely dead now. In fact, YouTube is rolling out AI dubbing for videos. So they're actually going to be using artificial intelligence to dub videos in foreign languages. So there's not even, I mean, that was like the last dying gasp of my profession, really, because they now are using machines for all of it. They don't need people anymore. At least they don't think they do. Yeah, so back to Arden, back to the Jornea. In fact, the yoke are two separate pieces joined at the shoulders. Yeah, that makes sense. And I'd like to do, Arden says, I'd like to do a thesis in medieval history, but may delay that to have a stable job at an archive for practical reasons. Yeah. The thing is that for the most part, the only thing you can do with a medieval history degree is work in academia. That's generally it. So yeah. And as I said, academia for me, it's unappealing. Just the way they treat each other, the kind of snobbery, the lack of collaboration, the competition. It's not the kind of environment in which I could thrive in that environment. I don't want to. It's not how I want to live my life. So yeah, I occasionally toss around the idea. I have access to my husband's GI Bill, and I occasionally toss around the idea of getting going for my PhD in historical dance or something like that, but I come right back, circle right back to academia as a shit show. So, yeah. In fact, I've watched friends who go through the whole process and eventually get their doctorate. I've watched them transform from a pretty nice, decent, a pretty nice, personable person to someone who becomes almost chauvinistic in their views because they have to. They have to be absolutely right all the time as part of, defending their dissertation. And yeah, the transformation was not a pleasant one. Didn't make them a nicer person. Yeah, adult life and those things. Jay Chang says, washing machine definitely changed the layer of clothing without the chore of laundry. Yeah, so the way technology has changed so much about fashion. But yeah, you're right. When you have a washing machine, suddenly you don't necessarily need to have a linen garment that you always wear to protect your skin from your outer layers, for instance. And of course, once you stop making your clothing out of precious fabrics and you don't care about abusing them in a washing machine, then that changes things too. Let me see. Joshua, translator was a really good job. That's crazy how they don't need people anymore. Yeah, it used to be a really good job. There's still a little bit of work left, but basically they were talking about paying me, the places that are still hiring want to pay me the same now as I was being paid as a brand new translator in 2007, not adjusting for inflation. I mean the same per line price. So yeah, tell me that's not a dead career field. I abhor AI almost as much as I abhor autocorrect and Trump. Yep, right there with you. What I really hate is how artificial intelligence is now stealing people's creativity. Not just, I mean, translation was also a creative field, and that's been stolen. And now we're talking about art. I actually had an AI company reach out to me who wanted to use my catalog of videos to feed their AI machines, to teach their AI machines how to make my content, and then take this job away from me too. I said no. But yeah, that's made me very conscientious about trying not to watch channels that use AI art, especially because that AI art has literally stolen other people's work and not paid them for it. Or to try not to consume things that where AI is used. It's going to get harder and harder, though. It really is. It's like making, conscientious shopping decisions, purchasing decisions is getting more and more complicated to buy from ethical sales, ethical sellers, vendors. That's what I'm looking for. What about advanced degrees in museum education? Oh my God. Advanced degree, museum studies. Wow, that it is so hard to find work in that field. There are not many positions open. And the people who get positions at museums hold on to them forever. I have friends who have degrees, advanced degrees in museum studies, and they're still waiting for a job. They're literally waiting for someone to die. Yeah, so no. Oh my God. Thomas Raybender, Shining, they managed to create a society where humans are no longer needed or wanted. Yeah, humans need not apply. There's a great video about that by CG, with that title by CGP Grey. He was one of my favorite creators. I don't even know if he still has a channel. I haven't seen anything from him in a long time. But humans need not apply, good video to watch. He makes some good points. When we talk about artificial intelligence, people and machines taking over jobs, people like to make the erroneous parallel between horses and the invention of cars. And they say, well, cars were invented, but horses are still around. Oh, yes, they are. But do you know how many horses there were at the end of the 19th century versus how many horses there are now in the United States? There were about 4 million horses in the 19th century. There are about 200,000 now. So, I mean, that could be a good parallel for what's going to happen to us. That we will go from being 7 billion people to 200 million. So that's not super great. Yeah. Let's see. Docents have something. Oh, yeah. Docents have something to go off of. So talking about the museum studies, yeah, docenting is also a highly, highly sought after position. Very hard, very, very highly competitive. And of course, then you have to live near a museum that has your particular field of expertise also, which, isn't necessarily always going to be the case. Let me see. Uh, friendly as a field of study and working environment. Hmm. Oh, AI is kind of like the printing press to calligraphy or sewing machines to hand sewing. Convenient, but it can lead to a loss of skilled craftsmanship. I think it might be worse than that, actually. I think because those things, we lost skilled craftsmanship, but you still needed people to operate them, at least the sewing machine. You still need people to operate them. The printing press, of course, yeah, those got completely automated. And again, those jobs are gone and they weren't necessarily replaced by more jobs. Let me see. So, what would be the earliest medieval man's garment that a beginner can make besides a tunic? Hmm. I would say a hood is pretty easy, especially the hoods that are not terribly fitted. Not the really sexy 14th century hoods that have the buttons and the neck is like perfectly fitted and the face is perfectly fitted around the head. But one of the sort of more I'm gonna call it the more peasant-like hood, where it's less fitted and it doesn't have any closures. A hood is a pretty easy thing to make. That kind of hood is a pretty easy thing to make. And you can, if you want, get more authentic and use a gore to widen the cowl of the hood or not. A coif is also a coif. A coif is super easy to make. And I mean, this kind of coif is a little more complicated. This is a winged coif, but just the simple kind of skull cap-like coif that men and peasants were wearing for a long time, just to kind of keep their heads clean and keep the dirt and dust and whatnot off of their hair. Coif is also super easy to make. Stockings, late women's stockings can be easy to make. Depends on which pattern, which style of construction you use. Yeah, I don't know in other areas, but in the humanities, they're of no usefulness. Yeah, I agree with that statement. Joshua, try making a shirt or a pair of braids. Oh, yeah, braids can also be pretty simple depending on the style of braids. If you're going for like the sort of 15th century braids start getting like super tailored and really complex, but in the 14th century and earlier, they're kind of just basically boxer shorts made out of linen. They're just two legs, two tubes basically that you attach, and they're not really terribly fitted. Yeah, good point. Braids are also a pretty easy option as well. A shirt is kind of basically like depending on the kind of shirt you make. Um, like St. Louis's shirt is not particularly easy. It's got some pretty, especially with the gores. I'm not certain, it's kind of hard to gauge what counts as beginner too. I generally think that anything with gores is not particularly beginner because gores and gussets can make your life a living hell. And there's some serious tricks to inserting them. But there are also some like really basic linen shirts that are made really simply with just rectangles and no gussets or gores at all in the earlier record especially. But you might count, I know it depends on whether you count shirts as just being a species of tunic. um, let's see. Nukasin che cevo fa stat buono. Alfonso de Lucia, I I speak and read Italian and I don't understand. What language is that? It's not auto-translating. So I'm actually I'm not picking up what you're putting down. There was also some Russian above, and I apologize to my Russian guest. It did not auto-translate, and so I wasn't able to understand what you were saying. I'm sorry. I apologize for my lack of Russian speaking skills. Okay, so what I'm doing right now, I'm about to attach the second length of finger loop braiding to the rest of the neckline. And so I've got to undo my finished end is where I just basically braided the little ends off until I figured out what I was going to do with this. Because if I was going to actually point this, I would have actually put the point around this little braided, where I braided it off at the end. And then that would have kept the nice the nice actual pattern of the finger loop braid outside of the chape, but I'm apparently not going to do that. I'm going to use it as decoration for this neckline. And you can see here how I don't know what the hell I was doing the beginning of this braid. I don't know if I was drunk or what, but it's I was not doing it correctly at all. You can see it took me a little while to get back to to actually get the chevrons actually started, so I don't know what's happening there. That's pretty bad. Oh my goodness. I think I was not paying attention to what I was doing. I think someone was talking to me and I didn't get it started off correctly. So I'm going to actually end up trimming some of this excess braided bit off, and then I'm going to, like I did at the end there, fold it under like this and continue onward from here. And actually I'm going to reverse the chevron here because when it comes around, then by reverse, I mean point the chevrons in the other direction so that when, one minute, lots of laces here. Okay. Once I lace it, I think, this is what I'm thinking right now, thinking I'm going to do anyway. Once I lace it, it will actually, the chevrons will be pointing away from each other. So they'll be mirroring each other like this. So the chevrons will mirror each other instead of going towards each other or one sort of chasing the other. I think that's what I'm going to do. Thinking about it, because if I'd actually stopped here in the back, but because this seam is here at my shoulder, then I think it won't matter that the pattern reverses there. I thought I'd come to a decision on this, and now that I'm actually looking at it, I'm trying to decide if I like my decision or not. To continue the chevrons in the same direction or reverse it so that when it meets up front, it actually looks like they're mirroring each other. It's a hard decision. Oh, while I think about that, oh, I missed a whole bunch of comments. Joshua says, awesome, I'm teaching my brother how to sew medieval items tomorrow. I've been sewing for 26 years, but it's just hard to think of different options. Yeah, it's also the more experience you have, the harder it is to really think about what counts as easy. Same thing for dance. People ask me, well, what's an easy dance? And I'm like, well, what I think of as an easy dance is not what you think of as an easy dance. Let me see. Try getting the Medieval Tailor's Assistant. Yeah, the Medieval Tailor's Assistant is a good book. Get the second edition. It has updates and whatnot that are very, very valuable. And there was another book, Making Medieval Men's Garments from the 15th century. It's a new one. I haven't had a chance to look at it, but everyone who has looked at it recommends it really highly. So I would look at that, and it's got on the cover, it has the picture of a gown, a 15th century man's gown with the pleats, the French style, not the Italian style. Yeah, I'm pretty certain it's called Making Medieval Men's Garments in the 15th Century or something like that. It's a very recent book, and everyone is speaking of it very highly. I just haven't had a chance to look at it myself yet. Let me see. I love doing finger loop braiding. Single braiding the ends under the chapes is a great idea. Thank you. Yeah, that's, I don't like wasting anything. And what she's referring to here is what I did here at the end, where I couldn't get my fingers through the loops anymore. That's the point at which you really can't do the proper braid anymore. I just did a 3 braid, broke the loops down into 3 clumps of 3, and then did a 3-way braid on it. So, and that's normally that's what I would put inside the chape. That's where the pointed end would go. Yeah. Thank you. That's my own thing. Other people may do that. Maybe it was a medieval practice. And actually, now that I'm thinking about an extant, there's been a couple of extant points. I mean, the whole point, so lace and chape, where I think the comment was that under the chape that it was braided, not finger looped. But don't hold me. There's something in my memories triggering, but don't hold me to that. I don't have the evidence in front of me right now. Um, if there's a mess up, I call it adding character. Yeah, so that's referring to this. Yeah, there's a lot of character. There's like 3 inches of character here. Let me see. I like the mirroring. Ah, thank you. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm leaning towards. Thank you for the book suggestions and the garment suggestions. I will definitely look into them. Yeah. Oh, damn it. I'm so sorry, people. I forgot to go get today's book corner books. Oh, and my condottiero is not here. Some of you know, as part of these live streams, I always at the end cap off with some of the more esoteric and what I might consider essential and fascinating books from my own reference library collection. Okay, well, we'll keep sewing for now, and we'll see if the condottiero comes back and can go and grab just some random things. Because part of my obsession with history is bibliophilia. I love books. I love owning books. I love having a real library. So, yeah, what that means is that actually, I think I'm going to, yeah, it means I'm going to do this end. Okay, that's what I will do. So, what that means is that I have a lot of books. And I have some very esoteric books. And because I can speak, read, and write in various languages, I have a lot of books that other people don't even know exist. Because if you're limited to one language, let's say you can only do research in English, then you might not realize there's a great book that's been published in German, and that has tons of pictures of extant garments in it that aren't included in other books on extant medieval clothing, right? So, I like to share these resources with people so that even if you can't necessarily speak or understand the written language, you can at least have the picture references. That being said, full circle back to the comment about me no longer having a career as a translator. Google Translate is getting crazy good. And it kills me to say that as a professional translator, right? But whose job has been eaten by the machines. But I will fully admit that when it comes to a lot of text, even some really crazy esoteric texts, Google Translate is actually pretty good. So if you don't know how to use that, you go to Google Translate, you take a picture of the text you want, and it will translate it for you. And I'll be honest, that's getting pretty sadly good. So if you get these books that are written in a language you don't understand, don't sweat it. Google Translate for the win, because we translators, we are a dinosaur. We are a relic. Literally 10 years ago, there was a professor at the University of Heidelberg, where I studied, by the way, translation professor, who people were asking him, his students were saying, well, where can I get a job? And he basically said, yeah, there's none. I can't tell you where you can get a job. You won't be able to use this as a profession anymore. And he just had to fully admit that. And that must have been heartbreaking for him to have to say that. But it's true, sadly. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and whip stitch this, the mangled end. I'm going to go ahead and secure that, and then I'll worry about pinning it along the front. Just trying to figure out where the camera is pointing. It's not pointing at the right place. Okay, checking the comments. You can never have enough books related to historical reconstruction of all sorts. For example, my girlfriend gave me a book with adapted medieval recipes from 15th to 16th century Catalonia. Yeah, I have. I have also a whole section on medieval cookery over there, with everything from facsimiles of cooking manuscripts to collections of redacted recipes from various eras. Yep, no, I agree. It's really once you go down the rabbit hole of medieval material culture, suddenly everything will seem interesting, at least for people like me. I'm always trying to get a whole picture. I'm always trying to really get an idea of how people really lived, of various classes of society, on the daily. That is that really, I don't know why. I've always wanted to know that from my youngest days. That's always been of great interest to me. Let's see. There's always new chances to learn new stuff. Yep, absolutely. Easy dance. An easy dance is a brawl, simple, or a pavan. I mean, yeah, for certain. But I guess my point about dance was, but even then, so even then, what I've learned from teaching dance, teaching, reconstructing, and researching medieval and Renaissance dance for almost 30 years, is that even that isn't necessarily as simple as we tend to think it is, I guess is my point. Comments, the original book even had a recipe for cat stew. Yep, I believe that. And actually in the inventories, there are mentions of cat fur. And the way the word that's used in the Latin is indicative that it is not, some beautiful wild cat from Russia, that they're talking about Felix domesticus. Yeah. So that doesn't surprise me that there's a recipe for cat stew. Oh, goodness. My career field went away 2 years ago, and what's left is a very few bottom of the barrel positions left. Yeah, I no longer work anymore, but it's sad when an entire career field disappears. Yeah, it is indeed. And my career field is gone. There's still translation and even interpreting work in some of the really rare languages. Language pairs that are not common. There's still, there's probably, I'm going to assume, still work for, say, Swahili or, some of the more exciting click languages in sub-Saharan Africa and South Africa, for instance. But yeah, for my field, which was European languages, done. Oh, yeah, Libro del Coq. Yep, I have that one. That is a great book. Yes, I tell you that Catalan, the medieval Spanish. I mean, medieval food is so delicious in general. It really is. It's a shame what happened to European cuisine, thanks to Louis XIV deciding he needed to be all religious and whatnot. To save his soul from hell after all of his youthful indiscretions. But yeah, medieval cuisine is just so lovely. So the flavor combinations, the sweet and savory and sour, the spices, the different textures, it's really just such delicious stuff. And on the Iberian Peninsula, especially, cuisine is particularly interesting because of that cultural melting pot. Italy too, because of the influence of Arabic and Middle Eastern, not necessarily Arabic, but Middle Eastern recipes and Middle Eastern cuisine. There is even a 15th century Neapolitan recipe that is basically fezanjan, the wonderful Persian pomegranate chicken stew dish. It is fezanjan. The only thing that makes it not exactly fezanjan is that it uses pork back as a fat, but everything else is fezanjan. And it is, talk about a connection. Let me see. I went from swords to civilian apparel and daily life. The material culture rabbit hole is real. It really is. Yeah. Thank you, Nevis. Yep. I started living history, not really knowing exactly what would interest me, but knowing that I just wanted to dress up in medieval clothes and immerse and escape from the modern world. And then the more I discovered, the more I wanted to know. The more the bottomless pit. It draws us all in. Oh, and I just realized I wanted to actually start this at the bottom. So I'm going to bring my needle back through to the other side. Okay, checking the comments. Yeah, it has to be very interesting to try cooking without tomatoes and potatoes. Yeah, you know what? What I've learned from years upon years of doing medieval cookery, and I've done it all. I've done it over a fire with reproduction medieval equipment. I have built an oven where we went and gathered the horse manure and the clay from the local farm and the clay from the local stream, and yeah, built it. Made the muck, the what's it called? Not mortar and pestle, damn it. Wattle. Made the wattle, built the wattle from hazel branches, made the daub using our feet to mix it all together. Like I've done it all, and I can tell you that it's, so many of the tricks we use to create flavor in the modern world didn't exist in the Middle Ages. Um, so you had to create flavor, you had to build flavor in other ways. And also because they just didn't have the equipment, they didn't have the ability to control fire in the way we do with modern stoves, for instance. Medieval cooking is always bursting with flavor, even without potatoes and tomatoes. I love medieval spices and the smells. Yeah, 100%. We've actually, I would say that tomatoes may have made us lazy in the cooking department, because the reason tomatoes appear in so much is not necessarily because tomatoes are wonderful in and of themselves, but they have a lot of umami. They have flavor enhancing compounds that literally boost the flavor of the dish. So even if you don't have a lot of tomato, just that little bit of tomato paste really makes the flavors pop. Well, when you don't have that, you just use other things to get that. It's not impossible. And for people, but you know what a lot of people are discovering, European people of Caucasian ancestry are discovering they actually can't digest tomatoes well. Oof. This is not going to go as well this way. Maybe if I do it now. I'm actually now sewing backwards than the direction I usually sew, and that's not going as well as it could go. Just to get this chevron. Yeah, oh well. Yeah, so, a lot of people actually of Caucasian descent can't handle tomatoes very well. It actually causes a lot of inflammation and digestive issues, and actually may be connected severely with some arthritis kind of related inflammation, because we just didn't evolve to eat tomatoes. Tomatoes are a New World plant. That's not what we evolved eating over the last thousands of years. So yeah, it's not necessarily, people think that either you're anaphylactically allergic to food or you can eat it just fine, and that there's nothing in between, but that's patently not true. So I would be interested to see if putting people on a medieval diet, a medieval European diet, people who have inflammation, Caucasian people who have inflammation, if putting them on a medieval diet, the healthy kind, not the rich, noble gout kind, would actually eliminate or reduce or eliminate their inflammatory issues. Be interesting to try. Oh, Ardens is saying that from a Mediterranean perspective. Oh, right. Yeah, right. Because modern Mediterranean cuisine is heavily predicated on potatoes and tomatoes. Absolutely. But, it's like that didn't even start until the 18th century. So, I have multiple medieval Italian cookbooks, of course, and what they do have that you would recognize from a Mediterranean perspective, from an Italian perspective anyway, would be, lots of pasta, actually, especially stuffed pasta, lots of different kinds of ravioli recipes, and some really complex, like layered pastas where you make a ravioli pie made of like 10 different kind of hand stuffed ravioli. But yeah, there's no tomatoes or potatoes there. Not a single one. Uh, Root vegetable instead would be turnips. um, I mean, obviously, also carrots are a root vegetable, but turnips don't really appear very often in the noble cookbooks. They did have squash. That's not a root vegetable, though. Yeah, so the comment is that medieval cuisine versus modern is such a stark contrast in Europe specifically, and actually in China too. So the same thing that happened in Europe kind of happened in China, um, but for different reasons. Chinese cuisine apparently used to be much more. There used to be a lot more variety of spices, and Chinese five spice is like the vestigial remnant of that. But China used to benefit from the spice trade too. And then when in the 15th century in the Ming Dynasty, that 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 emperor, after the great treasure fleet shut everything down, it closed down those trading routes, and so Chinese cuisine just got simpler and simpler, and the flavors. They still have lots of flavor, but it's not the same variety and complexity of flavor that there used to be before the spice trade got shut down. And then, of course, before Louis XIV decided he wanted to be ascetic and not eat complex foods and wanted everything to just be kind of simple and peasant-like, and all the other courts in Europe mirrored that, well, that was kind of the beginning of the end for European cuisine. Which is not to say that, you know, French food isn't delicious, Italian food isn't delicious, Spanish cuisine isn't delicious. Of course it is, and yes, there's flavor, but it used to be a lot louder, shall we say, I think is how I would describe it. BTW, Contessa, do you know any sources on how to reconstruct a capitanesca hat? Don't know if that's the proper name. Yes, that is a proper name. It is actually referred to that in some of the period sources. Handsome, would you mind grabbing your capitanesca hat so I can show people what that is? So it's in the bedroom. Yeah. So my theory is that it's felted. So you would actually need to learn the art of felting. And because felting allows you to shape things, right? So here's a capitanesca hat, right? And this was made by a felter in Lithuania, I think. I mean, I know who made it. I think she's from Lithuania and she lives there. This has been, you can see that because of the felting and the steaming and the shaping, that curve has been worked into it. And what she did to create this effect is she just made it extra tall. So it was actually like kind of like a column to here. And then she put a seam in. So on the inside, you can see that seam where she put that seam in there. And yeah, so that's how this one is made. That's the closest I can come to giving you a good idea on how they're reconstructed. This is, I think, a pretty reasonable theory for how this kind of hat was made, because if you look at the ones in the portraits, they really look like they're felted. They're like really finely felted, finely handcrafted items. Right. So yeah, you would just need to learn the fine art of felting and hat making. Haberdashery, that's all. No big deal. Let me see. Joshua Nichols says, I'm a leukemia survivor. Wow, congratulations. I don't know what to say to that. Good. I'm really glad. Wow, that's amazing. That's really amazing. I ate a medieval diet during my treatment and I became cancer-free in a year. My doctor's writing an article documenting my diet. He thinks that it's helped as much as the treatment. Wow, that's pretty amazing. Keep me apprised. I would love to read that paper once it's published, because I have a lot of parallel theories about how nutrition is killing us and could also maybe save us. Wow, that's amazing. That's pretty cool. Arden says, I know medieval lasagna seems very interesting, just as the plain layers of pasta with cheese and nutmeg. Yeah, medieval, I love lozenges. It is a delicious dish. That's the English name. Because, by the way, they had lozenges, lasagna, as a dish in England in the 14th and 15th century. How's that for interesting connections? Yeah, I love lozenges. Oh my God, so delicious. A good eggy pasta layered with the cheese and the cinnamon and the good spices, as one of the recipes calls for. It's really delicious. It really is. Especially it's beautiful if you really actually cut it into, the reason it's called lozenges is because it was supposed to be cut in those diamond shapes and served that way. Yeah, so it's supposed to be cut into diamond shaped lozenges. BTW Contessa, I love the wall decor behind you. Thank you. This is one of my 78 tapestries. Reproduction tapestries. It is a real tapestry. It's made of silk, linen, and wool.
It's an addiction.
During COVID, I was trapped in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and not able to travel to anywhere in my beloved Europe, or anywhere at all, really. And so we started buying tapestries to turn our space into a nice medieval space. And apparently there's lots of these replica tapestries available on eBay that were made 30, 40, 50 years ago, and they're pretty good quality. And people are selling them for pretty cheaply because no one seems to want them. That's why I have about a collection of 78 now. And a lot of them are pretty big. I have one that's 8 by 8 feet. So that's like, no, 12 by 12 feet. Sorry. I've got one that's 12 by 12 feet, which is like 3.5 meters by 3.5 meters. Or Yeah, probably 3.5 meters by 3.5 meters. I've got several of that size, actually. We had big walls, big open walls in my last house, so I needed to cover the space. Yeah, the lady and the unicorn for the win. I have all of them. I have all of the Lady and the Unicorn. I have some of the Hunt of the Unicorn and a bunch of others from other replicas of famous 15th century tapestries. Um, Thanks. I've seen many approaches, even gluing layers to make it stiff. Yeah, I feel like when it comes down to, we're talking about the Capitanesca hat, when it comes down to reconstruction, Occam's razor applies, right? So simplicity for the win, and I'll put the hat here so you can maybe see it in the screen too. Simplicity for the win, right? Apply techniques that are documented as being available in the period rather than reaching for approaches where we have to twist our brain to make it fit. Yeah, so that's always my approach to reconstruction of any kind. Is to consider the professions that existed, what kind of techniques they actually had at their disposal, what kind of techniques do we see in other types of similar things, and then go from there. That's just me. Until we find an extant one, we will never really know, will we? But I hold out hope that there might be one in one of these tombs in Italy that they keep opening, and that maybe we will someday find even just part of it, even if it's just like the top half, right? Arden, the medieval lasagna is delicious. You can always add veggies in it from the time period. Yeah, you can, but medieval recipes are crazy poor when it comes to vegetables. And I know why that is. I get it. And the reality is that peasants ate a healthier diet than the nobility did because they actually ate a balanced diet with actual vegetables, and the nobility tended to avoid them. But yeah, we don't have. You can add vegetables to the medieval lasagna, but I don't think it's a medieval practice to add vegetables to the medieval lasagna. But that's just because that's my reading of the sources, and it doesn't seem to be a thing that's often done. Pottages are a chance to mix vegetables and meat and whatnot, but it doesn't often happen in other places. Again, I love evidence to the contrary. Parsnips, that must cost an arm and a leg. Which must cost an arm and a leg? Oh, parsnips?
Your tapestries.
Oh, the tapestries. Oh, are you talking about the tapestries? Oh no, man. I got these for really good prices because
He's amazing at sniffing out deals.
I'm really good at sniffing out deals, and I actually have a video on one of the huge Hunt of the Unicorn tapestries I bought. If you go to my channel, look up tapestry, it should bring it up. Because I did a video on it, and also talking about how we got it and the price that we managed to get for it, etc., etc. Yeah, you go to eBay, and if you look up used medieval tapestry unicorn, and then just make sure you click on used because the new ones are made of petrochemicals. You can find amazing deals on them. I have about 7 reproduction tapestries as well. A lot of wall spaces in my house. Yep. It's not a medieval practice to add the lasagna, but it's still delicious. Oh yeah, totally, 100%. Yeah. If you're just making food for yourself, definitely. And I have to admit, if I eat medievally for too long, like if I eat like a noble person medievally for too long, I start feeling unhealthy. uh, because yeah, they have a real focus on meat in the recipes, and trying to find recipes that involve vegetables can be really tricky. Yeah. The tapestry, yeah. So this tapestry, I'd say it's 1.5 meters by 2 meters. I think maybe 1.5 meters by 2.5 meters. 1.5 meters by 2 meters, and I think I paid $300 for this one. And I guess what counts as expensive varies for different people, but I felt like 300 for this, considering it's lined, it's backed, it's nicely finished. This one had already had tapestry bars, so it's hanging from the metal bars that were already sewn into the back. Yeah.
I sewed this one though.
What did this one have?
Nothing. I thought.
Mm.
Maybe I don't.
Anyway,
Love you.
yeah, I thought, have fun. Where are you going?
I popped by the place and found a bunch of Magic players. Mentioned medieval living history.
Oh,
They're all
okay.
So
Go proselytize.
I'm taking. Do you think the loot is too much?
No.
I don't think so either.
My condottiere is going to go proselytize to a bunch of Magic the Gathering players about the joys of medieval living history. He's got his loot in his hand too, so that's where he's heading off to. Yeah, the you can actually find some pretty good deals on these tapestries. eBay is the place to go, and eBay France. I bought them from eBay France, eBay Germany. I bet eBay Spain also has some as well. So here's what happened back in the, I think anyway, from like the 60s to the 80s, maybe even the 90s. People were going up to the Low Countries, northern France, and they were buying these tapestries. Oops, sorry. They were buying these tapestries as souvenirs. Great. Well, they liked the tapestry as a souvenir. They liked it in their home, but I think what's happening is the people who made those trips are dying and leaving these tapestries in their estates to their heirs. And their heirs are going, yeah, I prefer modern Swedish chic, not this old crap. And so these are ending up on eBay, either donated to charity shops and being put on eBay or just being put on eBay straight up. So I think that's what's happening. Does your condottiero do historical fencing or just, oh no, we do it all. He does harness fighting. He does do some 16th century art of defense as well, but we're definitely, we support harness fighting. I do a lot of deeds of arms. In fact, he has a harness in the works that should have been done years ago, and that we're trying to get his armor to either finish or give us our money back on. Yeah, we have a whole bunch of manuals of defense and fighting manuals on our bookshelf as well, facsimiles also. We do it all. Yep. I haven't heard your condottiero play the lute. Please convince him to do so in a vlog. I will. I will tell him that you want to hear him play the lute. Which style of harness? Well, if do you mean which style amongst the medievalists who do harness fighting, or which combat style does he pursue? He's generally a fiorista, but which is stupid because fiore de battaglia just means flower of battle and is not the name of the author. But anyway, yeah, he's generally a fiorista, and he does also incorporate some other techniques into his style as well. He's what I would call a medieval mixed martial artist. Yeah. Does he do any kendo? He has not done kendo, but he has done taekwondo. We do live in Korea, after all. And he's done mixed martial arts, combatives in the army, right? Oh, in terms of oh, you mean the harness, not the, sorry, you didn't mean the fighting. You meant, yes, 1470s Milanese. In general, yeah, is what we commissioned. His other pieces are more haphazard because they came from an earlier stage in his life before he could afford an actually nice, good harness. And we've had this one on commission for almost 5 years. It's a long and painful story. But yeah, Milanese 1470s. Let's see. I am getting a turn of the 15th century harness based upon several sources. Oh, Italian Aragonese, nice, nice. Yeah, his is supposed to be really nice with some really great fluting and fancy frilly pierced work on it. It's supposed to be. It should be gorgeous when it's done. It will look pretty similar, probably. I mean, not like exactly, but it will be similar in silhouette for those who may have seen it to Maximilian's his harness from his youth, the one that was part of the first night exhibit. Yeah, that's a beautiful piece of harness. Oof, so nice. Yeah, but there's so many good pieces out there. And for those who don't know, the reason we're I don't know what just happened. Is everyone still there? I have no idea what just happened. It went dark and then it went undark. So let me know if you all are still there, hopefully. Yeah, the Max harness is gorgeous. For those who don't know, harness is the medieval English word for armor. They called it harness. And so that's why if you hear harness fighting, it doesn't, I know a lot of people imagine like a horse's harness and then they think some kind of like pony play thing, but it's not. It's the medieval English word for armor. And so harness, that's why we're calling it harness. A suit of armor, that's Victorian terminology. So yeah, it was called harness in period in English, and that's why we were calling it that. Let me see. The cam froze for a second. The one hand kept going. That's very interesting, isn't it? Okay. Cool. I thought he might have liked one similar to John Hawkwood's fresco, which is very Italian, although earlier. Yeah. John Hawkwood, definitely a bit earlier. But yeah, John Hawkwood, that fresco is like the 1440s, I think. Still pretty splendid. But yeah, he saw the Maximilian harness, and that was kind of all she wrote. We went to the last night exhibit at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in 2019, and that kind of sealed the deal, shall we say. But that's okay because, my persona is 1470s, kind of 1480s, so that really works out in time-wise. Which doesn't mean I don't like exploring earlier eras of fashion and material culture. And I do actually, I have this idea for a project I would like to do. I would actually like to do a different outfit from each decade of the 15th century in Italy. That's project number 1 with my copious free time. And then project number 2 was going to be actually an outfit from different parts of Europe in the 1480s. So do an outfit I already have outfits from Florence, an outfit from Venice, an outfit from Castilla, an outfit from Nuremberg, an outfit from Paris, an outfit from London, that kind of thing, all from the 1480s. So then I can really show the way fashions are similar and different in those different places. So those are 2 kind of long-term projects I would like to do before I die. We'll see if life allows me to actually start doing that. The reasons why I haven't started it are complicated. Let me see. Makes sense seeing how you have to be strapped in. Oh, right. Oh, harness. Harness makes sense because you have to be strapped into it. Yeah, possibly. But the word harness, so here's the interesting thing. The word harness in 15th century English actually seems to be used for anything that has metal bits added to it. So it's an adjective also. So for instance, fortunately my condotier is left again, so the belts. Those belts, 15th century belts in English inventories are described as being, if they have metal bits, they're described as being a girdle harnessed. So I think that the meaning of the word harness was actually probably just completely different in the 14th and 15th century in English, or had a completely different meaning than it does now also. 1420, yeah, I feel like it's later than that, at least the one of which I'm thinking, but I might be thinking of the wrong fresco for John Hawkwood. I may be thinking of the wrong fresco. The picture that I'm pulling up in my head is of clothing that is definitely from the 1440s, but that might not be John Hawkwood. Relying on theater of the mind. In Castilian, it's the same arnés because of the straps. But is it really arnés? Is that the 15th century Castilian word for it? Because that really just sounds like a Castilianization of the English word harness. That's I'm wondering if that's a modern sort of back translation of the word that's now being used in harness circles. The word that crops up in the Italian inventories, let me see, Lorenzo de' Medici's palazzo was filled with bits and bobs of armor. It was like a hoarder's fantasy for armor. And I'm trying to remember what the word in the inventories was for those bits. It was not harness, though, or anything like it. Oh, that's the word you read in Testaments and Inventories. Very interesting. So, as a linguist and an etymologist, I'm going to have to check that out and see what happened there, in which direction that word went. That is an interesting tidbit. Thank you for sharing that. Nice, my full harness. Okay. By the way, Ardens, if you can send me any, if there are any digital inventories that you have access to, I'd love to get my hands on those. I don't care if they're in Latin or Castilian or some other language spoken on the Iberian Peninsula in the 15th century. I can deal. Yeah, would love to get expensive, whatever primary source material you have that you know of, if you could share that with me, that would be super cool. Online, and I think I've posted about this, I'm pretty certain, in my community posts. There's a whole bunch of great digital resources now for inventories and expense accounts, depending on where you're going. The Exchequer of Scotland's, the Royal Exchequer of Scotland's records have been were transcribed in the 19th century and have been digitized. And so you can go and look at the 15th century expense accounts for the Royal House of Scotland and see the kinds of clothes they were buying, how much it cost, who was making them. That's a pretty neat resource. And there is the Will of Cecily Neville is online. She died in the 1480s. Great resource for 15th century clothing. The Will of the Charlotte of Savoy, Queen of France, who also died in the 1480s, is also online and also a fascinating resource for 15th century clothing and material culture. Oh, you have them pending for, oh, right. Sorry, you're correct. I apologize, Ardens. Right, got it. Well, I will be the first to buy your publication once it's done, so please keep me in mind. I love supporting academics and artisans, so yeah. Sorry about that, right? We'll definitely be purchasing that book. Yeah. Right. Yep. Got it. Well, that will be really fascinating. Were you there, Ardens, when I talked about the coat of Infante Pedro Enriquez that I just found out existed this morning? You probably knew about it because you're there in Spain and probably are, following the news much more closely in Spain than I am. But that was a really exciting find to me, even though it's 14th century, still very exciting to me. And for those of you who might just be joining our Sip and Stitch and Bitch, the son of Enrique II, who was the first Trastámara king of Castilla in the mid 14th century, his poor little son, Prince Pedro, fell out of the window of the castle in Segovia and fell to his death. He was interred in the cathedral. And then sometime in the 16th century, his body was moved, sometime in the 16th century, his body was moved and transferred. Sorry, the Spanish word was stuck in my head. Transferred to his bones. It was just bones. And his clothes were all put in this velvet coffer. And they just recently, at the end of the 2010s, started. Oh crap! I got ahead of myself. In the 2010s, they started restoration work in the cathedral, and they opened up his tomb and they found this box. And they opened the box and they found the little boy's bones, but also the garments in which he was buried, and they're so well preserved. I'm so excited. The construction on them is really interesting. The skirt of his coat, COTE, actually has gores to make it nice and wide and make it flare out. Yeah, I haven't read about it, but I just found out about it this morning. It was a random pin on Pinterest under medieval extant garments I'd never seen before. And this thing was so well preserved that I, honest to God, thought it was some Victorian knockoff. But it's not, it's real. Yeah. Enrique, yep, yeah, exactly. No, Enrique II. Yep. And his son Pedro. his poor little boy. And they analyzed the bones, and it turns out that he probably had rickets, which is really sad too. But he didn't get a chance to correct that because he fell out of the window of the castle. Yeah, which Ryan said, "Who on earth let that happen?" And I said, "Well, he was a toddler. I think he was 2 or 3. And at that age, they're trying to kill themselves. Man, it's what they do, right? They're out there doing everything they can to accidentally end their lives. And if someone's not watching, they fall out of castle windows, apparently." Yeah, this joint is actually looking pretty okay. Yeah, the joints can sometimes get a bit messy. I just had a thought about how I could have done this, and I might still be able to do this. Maybe on the next one. Wait, I thought it was his son. Crap. Well, the little boy who died? Or no, well, this was Pedro Enriquez. So maybe it's a different Pedro? Because this one died when he was like 2 or 3. He died as a very little boy. I was reading the article really quickly, so I may have misread it. This was literally just before I started this live stream, and I just wanted to get out the information that there were extant garments from 1366 that are really well preserved. And there's YouTube videos on them and everything. Like the restoration people really, really were really proud of their work and really tried to get the word out there about it. So that was really cool. Of course, they're all in Spanish, so but hopefully with that auto dubbing function that YouTube is rolling out, maybe that won't matter soon. So I'm just going to do a whip stitch to connect these two folded over ends here. It will sink into the finger loop braiding. And if anyone looks at my shoulder this closely, they had either be doing so with permission or I will smack them. Anyway, the garments are the coat, COTE, is very well preserved. He has an overgarment, a surcoat that looks kind of like a kaftan, actually, that is not as well preserved, but that still has enough preserved that we can tell what it was. And then there were some bits of silk brocaded tablet weaving. Well, they think it was silk weaving that may have been tablet, brocaded narrow band wear that may have been a belt, but there is like almost none of that left. Let's see, because if you're talking about the 60s, it's definitely his brother with whom he had a civil war. Nope, this was a little boy who died. little boy, Pedro Enriquez. He may not even really be mentioned much in the record because he died at like the age of 3. So definitely not a civil war with the little 3-year-old rickets-ridden boy. How do you have a civil war with a toddler? Yeah, that's why I think it's not the same Pedro. This is the problem with these royal families, right? They name their sons, depending on the practices. Sometimes the practice is to name your first son after your paternal grandfather, your second son after the maternal grandfather, or to name them after yourself. And, then you end up with all of this litany of names that all sound the same. Yeah, no, this was definitely a little boy. He died a sad early death. Yeah, no. Yeah, that's absolutely. He says, "My bad. I'm more into 15th century." Ditto. Studying nobility in Spain is a rabbit hole. Yes. Yeah, people. Yes. It is a crazy. And I mean, people don't realize there's still Spanish aristocrats wandering around. There was for a while one Spanish count who was actually sponsoring a Battle of Nations Bohort team at his castle. Like people were actually going there and training Bohort style combat at his castle. It was basically his team. I don't know if that's still going on. This was 12 years ago, so I don't know if that's still the case. 12, 13 years ago. Most of the time, the general history of the royal family does not matter because of how weak Trastamara's kings were. Yeah, for certain. I just care about the clothing, honestly, and the cultural stuff. So, you know, it was a messy time. That was a very messy time in Spanish history, in the history of the Iberian Peninsula. You know, you've got the Reconquista happening at the same time as all of these civil wars and all of this backstabbing and executing of lovers, and it's a messy period. Oh, this is what happens when you don't have wax, which I still haven't found my beeswax. There we go. But it came undone. Yay. It's a little messy. I think I'm going to leave it though, because I don't think I care enough to fix it. Yeah. It's a little messy because of the nature of this particular silk yarn that I used. I think I have an idea of how I will do it differently on the next joint for this particular kind of silk yarn. I think I will just whip stitch the ends closed. I'll do a little actually I'll do a buttonhole stitch along the edge to seal it, and then I'll just abut those two really perfectly and then whip stitch those together, and that'll probably make it less messy. This is how we learn these things. Bohort Zona Sur. They keep doing their trainings at the same castle. Yeah. I have opinions about Bohort. I'm not going to share them right now. I don't want hate in the comments, but it also depends on how the Bohort is done, right? We attended Battle of Nations to support Team USA in 2013 in Egmont. And basically, you know, ACL and Battle of Nations, that stuff is all, it's just rugby in armor. There is almost no actual combat technique because the whole point is just to get your opponent on the ground. And the second your goal is to have 3 points of contact with the ground, all you do is rush at people and push them over. Let me see. Condition that people can come and see it. Then you have the events that take place at the Castle of Belmonte, which is the property of another marquis. Yeah, I don't like it even though I've been a referee at an event. Yeah, it's not, it's, yeah. I also don't like, I don't like the culture that goes along with it too. The attitudes that go with it. I think it's not just the lack of elegance or the lack of it actually being medieval technique in any way, shape, or form. I think it's also kind of the culture that has sprung up around it is kind of toxic, I feel like. That's just those are my observations. Your mileage may vary. So I am so glad that in the US and in Europe, harness fighting is really spreading. And in the SCA, for those of you who know what that organization is, harness fighting is now a thing. It's been an experiment for over a year. It's been really successful, and it is spreading like wildfire. So that's pretty great. Yeah, HEMA is so much more beautiful. Yeah, although I have opinions about HEMA too. Not historical European martial arts. I have opinions about people who've tried to divorce it from the Middle Ages part of the historical. Who've designed modern black pads and weird jackets that have nothing to do with medieval culture in any way, and you can't really understand a historical kinesthetic art unless you wear the clothing of that art form, because that informs how it worked intensely. So if you're not wearing the right equipment, you're not learning the actual thing. You're just doing like this modern shadow of the original historical thing. Same thing for dance, by the way. If you wear modern shoes to do medieval dance, you're not going to be able to do the dances the way they were supposed to be done, and you're probably not going to understand them as well either. Same thing if you're not wearing the clothing that the dances were designed to be danced in, because the dances were designed to make the clothing look good, to make you look good in your clothes on the floor. Those are all went hand in hand. I'd like to do harness fencing, but in Spain, bowhurt is the norm right now. Yeah, well, yeah, that I'm sad to hear that. So is harness fighting not really picking up steam there? Has bowhurt kind of, because bowhurt got so big so early on, has that really distracted people? Yeah, movement would diverge in modernish gear. Yeah, yeah, this is why I always say if you care about the historicity of the thing, then you kind of need to experience it in the full kit that the original person would have experienced it. And that doesn't mean that your stitches, your seams have to be hand stitched. Your leather has to have been hand tanned using vegetable dyes, using tanning techniques that were available in the 15th century. No, but at least having the right weight and shape and flow of garments and equipment, at least having a reasonable facsimile thereof will change the way you do the thing. Using swords that are actually, based on medieval originals. That will affect how you do it. Yeah, so Audidins notes that, or Nevis notes that Bohart did some and it's expensive to get into. Yeah, I mean, yeah, so what I try to remind people about harness fighting, this is the thing people seem to forget. It's the rules in harness fighting are harness as worn, armor as worn, which means you are absolutely welcome to go out there without all of the harness and fight. You can still do that. Lots of people do. We have lots of young people in the US who cannot afford full harness, but they still do harness fighting. They use the techniques, they follow the medieval manuals, but they're wearing mail instead of full plate, or they're wearing cloth armor, fabric armor, cloth armor, right? They're wearing coats of plates. They're still wearing, you know, they're wearing much less expensive, much more accessible layers. What that means, though, is that, of course, its armor is worn. If they get struck, that will count as a good blow because they're not protected by harness. But they can still do it. And actually, it might make them a better fighter not having the harness, because then they have to rely on skill to actually be good and succeed rather than relying on harness to protect them. So I think people forget that harness fighting doesn't mean you have to have full harness. It's using the medieval techniques and medieval swords and equipment. The level of harness you have determines how vulnerable you are, but you can still get into it even without full harness. At least in all of the groups that I participate in, you can. Obviously, different clubs have different rules, but I prefer the more accessible route that allows people to build their kit gradually and still participate, rather than expecting everyone to have a perfect kit right out the gate. But that's me being inclusive again. Tisk, tisk, tisk. Let's see. When will they add horses to harness fighting? Already do. There already are people doing Großfechten, as it's called, so horse mounted combat. Already a thing. So yeah, that's already been done. Obviously, that harness fighting mounted combat gets crazy more expensive, because then you need to have a horse, and you need to have a horse who's trained in mounted combat, because not just any horse is going to let you sit on them and wail away at someone on another horse with a sword. So that gets way more expensive, but there are people doing it. I have multiple friends who do it, and successfully. On the other side, HEMA in Spain is very related with fencing, similar to the Olympic one, in terms of not wearing armor, just modern equipment. Yeah, that's the problem with HEMA in a lot of places. And they're almost doing it with this deliberate snobbery, trying to say that they are pure, they're an actual martial art, because they're not LARPing, they're not wearing costumes. But I'm like, then you're not doing a historical martial art. Stop calling yourself that. Just call yourself fencing. Yeah, you might be using the medieval manuals, but that's all you're doing, or the 16th century or 17th century manuals, but you're not doing it the way they would have done it. Let's see. HEMA equipment is complicated. Some of it is very clearly for sports. Some of it is to enable full force sparring with more accurate weapon simulations for unarmed combat. The latter is sometimes worn, maybe. Yeah, footwear is a real mess. Federico Malaguti did a few videos exploring and demonstrating the challenge of historical footwear on historical surfaces. So, okay, this is someplace I can definitely address. You know, here's the thing. We modern people have learned to move in modern clothes. We have learned to walk based on modern footwear, which, by the way, is not good for us at all. It's probably causing most of our chronic musculoskeletal issues. So when you grow up wearing a certain kind of clothes and wearing a certain kind of footwear, you learn to move in that. You learn to balance. You learn how to walk in that on those surfaces. And I honestly, I don't think that medieval people had to do anything to their shoes to make them grippier. I don't think they wanted them to be grippier. I think they learned how to walk in them and fight in them and dance in them as they were, because that's what they had to do. I think medieval people who are serious about really pursuing the more authentic level of medieval martial art or dancing should take the time to relearn, to retrain themselves how to walk in those shoes. Because I can tell you, I know lots of people who do it. They fight in medieval footwear and they never slip, they never fall. They've just trained themselves to balance differently and to place their feet differently and more in a more judicious manner than just sort of lazily relying on the rubber grip to hold them up. That's my opinion. Not, I have no opinions at all. I am apparently an unopinionated person. Um, yeah, so that's, oh, wrong. Oh, okay, even though wrong. Oh, I see. Yeah, that's true. Yep. Yeah, so that is my opinion on medieval footwear and doing medieval things in it. I think we have same thing with clothing. You know, we've become accustomed to being able to move in a certain way or not move in a certain way. And we rely on our clothes and our shoes to just kind of do the thing for us instead of using our muscles and our foot placement to do the thing for us. That's my take on it. The reason is because, you know, I've looked at hundreds of extant shoes, probably pictures of them, archaeological reports about them. And the thing and I've read tons of chronicles about combat, about tournaments, about fighting. And the thing I never find reference to, and I am happy to have evidence presented that contradicts what I'm about to say, but I have not found any evidence of adding something to the sole to give it grip in the Middle Ages. Roman soldiers had hobnails. I haven't found that in 14th or 15th century footwear. And we have lots of extant footwear. So, yeah. You know, finding a good pair of turn shoes is hard. It is not, actually. Okay, it depends on where you are. You're in Spain. That might be hard. I can highly recommend Boots by Bohemond. He is an American shoemaker. He lives in the Albuquerque area. And all of my turn shoes I've been getting from him for the last lots of years. And he does custom work and he knows his stuff like really well. And he can absolutely make you a pair of those really great custom like fighting ankle boots where they have the laces that tighten the ankles and bring up the arch and make it fit your foot perfectly. Really, he can do it. And he does work and he will ship to other countries. And, you know, with the exchange rate between the euro and the dollar being what it is, okay, actually, I don't know what it is right now, but, you know, his prices are pretty good too. Like I can get a good pair of latchet shoes for $60 to $80, the low ones, and the boots for like $100, $120. So this message was held for review. Why so, okay, whatever. Okay. Great. Let's see. Nevis says, yes, he came to similar conclusions. It changes your footwork when leather shoes might slip on wet grass, so your footwork needs to be more stable. Yep. Ah, I'm so glad when we independently from different fields, but all kinesthetic, come to the same conclusion. And I tell people this all the time in dance, in my dance classes, that they actually kind of need to learn to walk differently because ever since we added heels onto the backs of shoes in the 16th century in Europe, we've started training ourselves to walk heel toe instead of toe heel. And that's killing us. It's why we have heel spurs, so many of us. Okay. Wow, I think I feel like I blacked out while I was sewing and I just finished this without realizing it. Okay, let's see what we've got on the neckline here. I turned this inside out to show it off, and now it's making it more challenging for me to do the thing. Turn it right side out. Just tuned in. This looks like awesome. Can you give a brief overview of your channel, please? Yeah. Oh, have to leave. Thank you, Artens, for, as always, your wonderful conversation. I look forward to more chats with you. Have a lovely evening in Spain. Good night. um, yeah, hi, Sarah. Welcome. My channel is focused on historical creativity from many different eras and cultures. I particularly focus on 15th century Europe, but I definitely do branch out. And I was actually just about to show a thing I just finished, which is attaching the trim to this neckline. And I'll show it here in the camera. So that's what we've got going on the neckline of my 1480s Florentine Gamora, being sort of the base layer that you wear over your foundational garment that you wear over your smock. And I finger loop braided that. So that's a silk chevron braid of 8 loops for one person versus the 12 loop one for 2 people. And this is where the joint was between the 2 braids. That doesn't look too awful if you don't look closely. And this is the neckline. So I'm going to hold this up here and show that off. So there is how it looks. Yep, I'm pretty okay with that. I'm pretty happy with that. I don't think I'm going to redo a thing about it. There are some little like minor wobbles in the application. You can see a spot where I dropped the loops because my cats, when I was doing this finger loop braid, my cats suddenly were super interested in what I was doing and kept attacking the loops. And I had to have Ryan put them in another room and shut the door. Love the kitties. Yeah, so my channel is about historical creativity, and that includes sewing and textile arts and cooking and dance and medieval material culture. And I love sharing my passion with people. So I've got tutorials on dance and sewing and cooking. I've got project vlogs, specifically the most recent one for making this dress. I do men's and women's garments. I explore all classes from the era. So yeah, that's kind of what this channel is all about. And also inspiring and encouraging other people to explore their creativity similarly and to try it no matter how good or bad they think they are at the thing. It's actually 5 a.m. in the morning here. Yeah, I just realized that. Dear God. Well, thank you so much for staying up to join me. The problem is that trying to hit all the time zones is really tricky because I'm in Korea. Half of my viewers are in Europe, half of them are in America. And I'm dead by the evening, the time that would actually be good for like all time zones. And if I get up too early, I have insomnia issues, and that can screw me up for a day. Anyway, oh, by the way, everyone, I'm joining Philip on his channel tomorrow. We will be discussing the clothing from Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. If you want to check me out on Irish medieval history tomorrow with him. Yeah, well, thank you, Sarah. That's really great. Awesome. Yeah, I love sharing my passion with people and encouraging them to pursue their own historical passions and sharing all this random knowledge I've accrued over the years. So here's what this looks like on the inside. I'm going to trim this little knot here off and trim this excess. I decided I didn't need to sew it down all the way. I don't know what I'm going to do with that little bit, but go ahead and do that now. Yep, here we are. Okay. And then I can move on to the less fun thing, which is going to be securing these pleats so that I can detach the skirts and redo the bottom of this bodice. As I discussed in my mistakes project, the things I did wrong when making this dress video that I just recently published, I need to pull up the bodice, shorten the bodice so that the skirts don't drag on the ground the way they do, and also so that there's more strength in the connection between the skirts and the bodice. You can see how that's actually completely pulled out. And so literally the skirts are only attached to the wool shell, and they need to be attached to all 3 layers. So yeah. Old but hot. Thank you. What is on my head? This is called a coif. It is a 15th century head covering, basically. It's a winged coif. It's what we call it, but it was just called a coif in period. And it's just, this is what people in the 15th century wore. I'm dressed in my 15th century casual at-home clothing right now. So these are the underlayers, as it were. I'm not wearing any of the overlayers. What type of material are you using? This is wool. This is a pink wool twill. And on the inside, it is interlined in white linen and lined in a blue linen. So, and then for stitching, for most of it, I used silk thread. On some of it, I used linen. Most of the seams are silk. Some of them are linen thread. Yep. These are reproduction lacing rings. Based on original finds, and they were made from the 15th century. And these ones are made by Billy and Charlie's Finest Pewter Wares, and you can get them for really inexpensively on their website. They are not a channel sponsor, but I highly recommend them. Yeah. Armor and Castings is a channel sponsor, and I am stupidly not wearing any of my Armor and Castings bling, but they do lots of replicas of medieval and ancient metal bits, so all the bits and bobs, necklaces, belt fittings, pendants. They do a lot of really great stuff. Rings. I am wearing one of their rings, though. This is a Armor and Castings ring, stirrup ring. Which country are you from? I didn't mean to say, I just wanted to say you're beautiful. No, that's okay. That's fine. I appreciate you saying I'm beautiful. I am currently in Korea, actually, but I am not from there. I am from the United States originally, but I have lived most of my adult life not in the United States on purpose. Yeah. So that's where I currently am, is Korea. I am streaming from Daegu in South Korea currently, one of my favorite places to be. I love your collar and coronet. Yeah, actually, I do have. Oh, I've got my bentwood sewing box here. The coronet, you can kind of see the bits of the coronet here that they made. It's pretty amazing. I'm not going to dig it out right now because it's covered in other things. That will be very frustrating. Which are you from Canada? Is that what we're calling the 51st state now? I forget. We keep trying to claim territory that's not ours. I'm losing track. Okay, so I'm now going to go ahead and I'm going to start securing the pleats so that when I unstitch this, the pleats are still pleated to each other, and it will be easy to just reattach the skirts that way rather than undoing the pleats and having to redo it all again. So I'm just going to put in some securing stitches between each of these pleats, basically. No, my beeswax is not there. My beeswax is God knows where. I don't know where it is. I have lots of beeswax. I have pounds and pounds and pounds of beeswax, and I don't know where on earth it went. After the last trip, we're living in a bit of chaos right now because we are trying to, we're in the process of job hunting in Korea and or Europe, and we haven't yet secured a job, so we're in what I call our storage apartment. Nope, it's definitely not in there. No idea where the beeswax is, any of it. I think I have some beeswax candles, but I don't want to use those. They're candles, and they will be useful for burning as candles. So I'm just going to put in just sort of, not much, just a couple of whip stitches to secure these pleats together. And then when I separate the waist seam, the skirts from the bodice, then the skirts will stay pleated. This is a box pleat, by the way. And I won't have to redo all of the pleating once I've adjusted the skirts. Yeah, so let's see. What other discoveries? My first video on 15th century Irish men's clothing is in the editing process. I hope to have it done in the next couple of days. That's going to be published on Irish medieval history. The companion pieces, the Anglo-Irish clothing and women's clothing will be published. Irish 15th century clothing will be over on my channel, though. So keep your eye out there if you're interested in following those two, that topic. You know, it's a really complex topic. Some people have some very fixed ideas about 15th century Irish clothing. And it's a lot of them are not true. Most of them seem to not be true, which can be frustrating for people who have an idea about what a lena is or what an inar is or what a brat is. And when I tell you that all of those things changed over the centuries and were never the same from one century to the other, that will probably frustrate some people, but it's the truth. And there seems to be a tendency at the National, oh wait, no, I don't want to use my nice silk thread for this. There seems to be a tendency at the National Museum of Ireland in Dublin to not carbon date things. So they have all these extant bog garments, and a lot of them they haven't carbon dated. The medieval ones, or possibly post-medieval, but we don't know because they haven't carbon dated them. They haven't carbon dated them. So even though the construction of these garments absolutely looks like 14th and 15th century construction, they keep insisting, but it seems to be from a 17th century layer, so we think it might be 17th century, but we haven't carbon dated it, so we don't know. I'm like, well, why don't you carbon date it? How hard is that? Anyway, that's just me whining, obviously. Oh my goodness. Let me see. What do you recommend for durability? Well, do you mean in terms of the thread or the fabric? So in terms of the fabric, yeah, durability, wool is very durable. Linen is also very durable, but not necessarily often used in overgarments, in outer garments. Depending on where you are. Yeah, wool is definitely very durable. The weave of the fabric can sometimes matter as much as the fiber, though, because you can absolutely have very durable weaves of silk that just, they last really long and they last hard because they've been woven tightly. Like I have a silk damask over there that I'm pretty certain isn't going to wear away for a long time. By the same token, I've had a silk charmeuse that wore away after only 3 years of being worn as a dress. So yeah, kind of as much as anything, it depends on the weave, almost as much as the fiber. You know, a denser, tighter weave will have much more durability than a looser weave will. And, you know, you can tell that by if you pick up the fabric and, you know, it has lots of bias stretch and it's really loose, you can almost maybe see light through it. That's looser. That's going to last less long than something that's more densely woven. Yeah. Wool is good because it is naturally flame retardant. Most people don't know that. That's why people who worked in kitchens and around blacksmiths wore wool. And it breathes really well as long as it's not boiled wool, which basically seals up any gaps between the fibers. As long as it's not boiled wool, it lasts really, really, it breathes well. I've worn this exact dress in Thailand. in Thai tropical weather, and I was just fine, very comfortable. Yeah. That's a very good question, though. Now, the better question for me at this moment is where is the end of this spool of thread? So that's an end that is clearly not. This is a spool of linen thread. And the actual end seems to have decided it doesn't want to play. Because this is not the actual end. This is probably the beginning where I started spooling it. Now, that might be why I haven't been using this spool of linen thread very often. Or maybe... Nope, that definitely wasn't it. I just broke the thread. Well, we'll see. Pulling out the thread. And if you're just joining, don't forget to hit that thumbs up, everyone. A lot of people don't realize how much that really does help with the algorithm and promoting a channel. Also, when the video publishes, if you can, and you want to, take the time to even just leave an emoji in the comments under the published video, not just here in the live chat. That also helps promote my work and my channel and lets YouTube know that people are interested enough to actually watch my content, and then YouTube will then push my content in front of more viewers, etc., etc. The spiel. I hate having to give the spiel, but that is the ecosystem in which I operate. What fabric was most used for quilts? Quilts. Okay, so first off, there in the Middle Ages, we have zero evidence of patchwork quilts. We do have a giant set of matched extant quilts, what we think were probably bed covers, but they may have been wall hangings. And those are made of linen. One of them is in the Palazzo Davanzati. Another piece is in the Bargello Museum in Florence, and another of the pieces is in the V&A Museum, and I think there's a fourth chunk of it in Sicily, at a museum in Sicily. But all of them, interestingly, were made in Sicily in the 14th century, and it actually depicts quilted into the quilt. It's not patchwork, it's quilted, it's a quilted design. And the design that is quilted into it, stuffed and quilted, is the tale of Tristan and Isolde in quilted form, and it's linen, linen top, linen bottom, and cotton wool batting in between, cotton wool padding in between. What fabric was most used? An emoji in the Polish video. Published video, published, not Polish, sorry, published. Once the live stream ends and the video posts, just go under the video and leave a comment, even just an emoji under the video in the main comments rather than just in the live chat. Yeah, that's what I meant. Published, not Polish. Apologize for not enunciating. Yeah, so that quilt it's available. You can view it on the V&A's digital collection. Maybe if you look up medieval quilt in their digital collection, you can see it there. It's pretty neat. It's amazing. This thing, it's massive. This thing is absolutely immense. And the fact that it's kind of been broken down into pieces, probably to be, probably to be sold off, I'm assuming, in pieces in the 19th century to collectors, because that was the big Gothic craze, right? That's when all of the robber barons start. Oh, shoot, sorry. That's when all the robber barons start collecting medieval objets. Really? Sorry, I've got to get back into 6503. Okay, I don't know why. Whose camera is this? Whose camera is that? This is the Condottiero's camera. We might just have to do out without the second view. Oh, there it is. Okay. Great. Okay. Camera's back. Sorry about that, everyone. I got a little overly enthusiastic talking with my hands. It's an amazing quilt. Really gorgeous. Yeah, can recommend highly. I actually, in my recent video on my tour of Florence, my unique tour of Florence, if you go check that out, I go and visit the quilt in person and show the quilt and provide some details about it in that video. So if you want to check that out, can recommend. Yeah, it's one of the reasons I have a travel channel in addition to my creative stuff channel, is because I love traveling as part of my exploration of culture and history. So, when I went to Florence last year and a half ago, as part of a business trip to teach medieval dance at a medievalist event there, of course, we went around Florence in 15th century Florentine clothing and explored 15th century Florentine spaces like the Palazzo Davanzati, and took copious footage and put it together in a fun little travel vlog. So yeah, if you're interested in checking out the Palazzo Davanzati, which is, by the way, basically been restored to its 14th and 15th century state, so you can see the kind of spaces in which 14th and 15th century Florentines lived. You can also see the quilt there and see me in 15th century Italian Florentine attire wandering about these amazingly, gorgeously decorated spaces. I've seen it in the V&A website, and it's truly a work of art. Yeah, it really is. It really is. And you can see the other part of it if you go, I think, Susan, I'm pretty certain you watched my Florentine vlog, but if you didn't, go check it out and you can see it there as well, the quilt, one of the other pieces. And especially with this linen, I really should be using beeswax, and here I am not doing the right thing. Do as I say, not as I do, dear viewers. Always beeswax your thread when you are hand sewing, or you can possibly face a whole host of unpleasant issues, which I'm currently not facing, but that could change. Yeah, it's sort of amazing. You think about all of these pieces of history, of material culture that have survived despite wars, despite fires. It's sort of amazing that anything has survived at all, really. I appreciate you, Susan. Susan is really like my one of my channel's biggest supporters. I really appreciate your dedication to my work, Susan, really. She follows me on both my creative channel and my Travels with the Contessa channel, and always comments, and always, even if it's just to ask how the kitties are doing. Really great way to support. Yeah, for those who are just joining, welcome to our Valentine's Day Sip and Stitch and Bitch. My sipping capacity has diminished greatly because I have no tea left. I was drinking, yeah, more of my, think my guahui oolong from that plantation I visited, the tea plantation I went to in Chiang Rai, Thailand. Such good tea they had. And it was so beautiful. The tea fields, there is something so quintessentially relaxing and wonderful about tea plantations. The sculpted curvature contours of the hills, the sort of abundance of green everywhere. We have some tea plantations here in Korea too, and I just love going and sitting in the middle of a tea field and drinking tea and just relaxing in the peace. It's really wonderful. How do you wax your thread? Yes. I'm honestly learning and so grateful I found your channel. Well, I'm grateful for you having found me. Then, yay, the algorithm worked for once. The almighty algorithm has not done us wrong. So if I had a chunk of wax, what I would do here, I'll simulate the waxing of thread. I actually do cover this, I think, in my project vlog on the gown. I actually have a full project vlog on making this gown, by the way. It's about 2 hours and 11 minutes long from start to finish. Lots of details, tutorials on stitches and techniques and whatnot in that. So you might want to check that out for certain. But basically, what I do is I thread my needle first with the thread, and then let's say this is a chunk of wax. Pretend this is wax. Okay. I take my needle and my thread and I actually pull the thread through the wax, just like that. Just pull it through. Sorry, trying to figure out the direction of this camera is really strange. Just pull it through. And that will actually put wax on the thread. And then your thread gets stronger, it gets slicker, and it won't knot on itself as easily. That's the many benefits of waxing your thread. I had the same question on your last live, but I didn't want to ask a second question. Oh, did you ask me and I missed it? I am so sorry. I apologize. There was a whole flurry of questions that I missed because I got answering one topic, and I apologize. Please never fear to re-ask a question. If I don't address it the first time or I don't address it clearly, please always ask again. By the way, Nuclear Andal, it's wonderful to see you again. Thank you for joining us today. Yeah, and so with wax never goes bad, by the way. They have found wax in ancient Egyptian tombs that is still pretty good. It's just a little dry and hard, but it's still wax. If you warm it up in your hand a little bit, especially if the temperature's a little cold, just warm the ball of wax, the lump of wax up in your hand to make it a little softer, and then pull your thread through. Otherwise, if your wax is really hard, your thread might fray and break rather than pull through it. So always use your hand to just warm it up. And sometimes, if I'm at an event and it's like cold outside and I'm sewing outside, then I'll actually bring the wax up to my mouth and use the heat of my breath to help accelerate that process. Yeah. Oh, no, please don't be a scaredy cat. Oh gosh, I'm sorry if I was too intimidating or something, please, everyone, always ask your questions, even if it doesn't seem related. That's what this is about. We're here to have a good conversation, right? I'm here to sew. I'm here to answer your questions. I'm also here to hear about your projects. What are you working on? What have you done? What are your experiences? You know, so I'm over here in Korea. You guys are everywhere else in the world, and this is a way we can connect, and I can feel a little less isolated. So comment is, oh my gosh, I didn't think of warming it up. I've been wondering why my thread would keep breaking. Yes, if you're waxing your thread and your thread keeps breaking, it's because your wax is a little older possibly and a little harder, because the newer stuff is really soft. So all you have to do is just heat it up and soften it. So your hand, sometimes if it's particularly stubborn, I'll actually put it like under my muscular warm leg between that and this whatever surface I'm sitting on, and that can also really help kind of accelerate that heating process. Yeah. Where do you suggest I buy it from? I'm deep South Georgia, so not a lot of stores. Yeah. So if you are, um, so actually, craft stores often have beeswax. Michaels, Hobby Lobby I've boycotted them for many good reasons. But Michaels, craft stores like Michaels, they actually often have beeswax beads. And I'm trying to remember why they are there. But those are more expensive, but they're super pure. They've been cleaned, so there won't be like bee body parts in them. But you can get them from Michael's craft stores and other craft stores, and why do they have them? I don't know why they have them, but they do. And there's like a wall of them, and they come in different sizes. And I don't know what the modern application for them is, but they do have them. And if you ask where their beeswax is, they will be able to tell you. But you can also, if you know any place where beekeepers, right? If you look up Google local beekeepers, they have wax, and they nearly always need to find some use for it, because if all they're producing is honey and they're not actually making candles and whatnot, then they always end up with excessive wax. Also, if you look up candle shops, they also often will sell just beeswax candle, not like Yankee Candle. I mean like an actual beeswax candle place. Online, absolutely. Lots of online. So the place where I often get my wax at an event called Penzic every year. And there are these, they're called, I think they're called the Bee People. If any of you go to Penzic and know the beeswax candle vendors, correct me, but I think they're called the Bee People. But either way, you can go on Etsy and buy it. Literally, you can go on Etsy and look up beeswax. And you will find it for sale, 100%. But I can't imagine that there aren't any people making honey in Georgia. Even in Georgia, I know a lot of beekeepers in Georgia. Either way, maybe where you are, you're very isolated. So I totally get that. I have also lived in a very isolated place. Yeah, but Etsy is a great place for beeswax. And it never goes bad. So if you can get a better deal on it by buying a larger quantity, then do that. I recommend keeping it in an airtight container, because it will kind of dry out. That doesn't make it bad. It just makes it dry out. So I keep mine in wrapped. I keep mine waxed in beeswaxed linen wraps that I use instead of plastic wrap. And then sometimes I put those in like a metal container or something like that. Just kind of, because I live in a very dry place. It's very dry here in Korea. Very, very dry. Yeah, beeswax on Etsy, no problem. Let me see. They have thread wax at Joann's, which was doing liquidation sales now. Now, what I don't know about Joann's is if it's beeswax or like a petrochemical wax. I can't tell you, but I kind of suspect it's probably a petrochemical wax. Yeah. I try to avoid petrochemicals for many, many reasons. But, on the other hand, if it's going for cheap and it helps you, then go for it. Yep. I began doing astrological talismans a year ago, and I mostly keep to materials, cuts, images, sigils that would be plausible for my primary kit period. Did I miss a comment? Oh, you're responding to my comment about work. Oh, that's pretty cool. I'm working on a folding fan since I could not find some commission design from. Got to learn to dye, paint the silk myself, and bind it to the fan bones. Are you talking about, oh yeah, folding fan. So you mean this kind of fan, right? Yeah. Dyeing, dyeing silk. Yeah, I can give you some tips on dyeing silk. One, don't do it in your unventilated apartment. So the thing about dyeing in general, tips on dyeing fabric. Make sure that you have a vat that allows your fabric to flow freely. It can't be, because I made the mistake, lessons learned from failures. I made the mistake of dyeing in a vat that was way too small and my fabric was stuffed in there and just folded on top of itself. And it basically came out like tie-dye. What you need is the fabric needs to flow freely in the pot so that the dye stuff adheres evenly throughout it. I mean, that's if you're doing medieval dyeing. Obviously, I assume that's what you're talking about wanting to learn, because otherwise you can get RIT dye and pop something in the washing machine, right? But for medieval dyeing, for historical dyeing, your vat, that's why dyeing vats were huge. If you ever look at medieval representations of dyers and their vats, they're massive. That's so that there's plenty of room for the fabric to move freely and for the dye stuff and the liquid to flow freely through it. Yeah, so that's tip number one. Tip number two is to make sure that you have a non-reactive dye pot or you're using a copper pot. Non-reactive means don't use iron, because iron will completely throw off, it will utterly change the color of your dye stuff. So an enameled pot, or better yet is a copper pot, which is what medieval dyers used. Distilled water, obviously, or if you have a good source of clean rainwater that isn't acid rain. And patience, lots of patience. Those are my tips for dyeing. I can a ton. Would a mason jar work? Would a mason jar work? Oh, right. Yes, absolutely. Yes, for storing your wax, 100%, definitely. Also, yes, I also have things in glass jars as well. Definitely. It's just my recommendation after having had wax sit kind of out and exposed for literally 15 years and then finding it to be not as soft and pliable as it once was. Yeah, so that's why it's not going to go rancid or anything like that. It's just a good way to keep it from getting crunchy. Susan says, I used to dye in tub after boiling water on the stove. It did okay, but cleaning up was a bitch. Oh my God. Yeah, I guess so. Oh yeah. Oh my. Oh yeah. In Germany, I actually managed, when I was living in Germany still, I managed to buy an old, and I mean old, like antique sausage pot, sausage/laundry pot. So that's one of these immense pots that were actually meant to go in this like this brick frame, and you'd build a fire underneath, just like a medieval dye vat, actually. And they were still using them in Germany up until the first half of the 20th century to do laundry and to make sausage. And then everyone got modern in Germany, and grandma and grandpa died, and people were inheriting these things, these massive copper pots, and just selling them on eBay for nothing. Often, though, people were poking holes in them and turning them into planters. Ah! The horror. Taking a beautiful, expensive copper pot, giant, and poking holes in it and turning it into a planter. It just breaks my heart. So I have one of those in storage back in the US that I hope to have access to again someday. Yeah. Let me see if I missed any. Of course, the Medal of Venus would be the only one for dyeing. Indeed. I mean, it does track. Let me see. That's pretty cool. Working on using materials and astrological symbols from your era. Very cool. Okay, tub dyeing might not work. The idea is a blue base with white clouds. Not sure what the best way to go about it is yet. I mean, just you can do it on your stove. I mean, honestly, for silk, you really, especially with period dyes, you really need heat. You need the application of heat. So, I mean, if you live in an apartment and it's not well ventilated, you can get actually one of those tabletop burners from like a Korean grocery store that they use for tabletop cooking, and go out into your yard or a park even and set up your pot there and do the heat part of the dyeing process there, and then, you know, let the rest of it happen back in your establishment. I'm fascinated with the medieval dyeing process. The only thing I know is beets for dyeing. Oh gosh, yeah. So vegetable dyes like that were, you know, it's funny. Beets were actually not apparently used for dyeing very much. Not in the records anyway. So we actually have medieval dyeing manuals from various parts of Europe throughout the medieval period and into the Renaissance, and they describe in pretty good detail how to dye different kinds of fabrics, different shades. You know, the dye stuffs that they had were often plant roots. So you know, you have different parts of the plants. You have roots, you have leaves. In the case of red, you have madder, which is the root of a plant that is, you know, kind of a cousin of Queen Anne's lace, actually. And I seem to have lost my sewing needle. Ah, there it is. Yeah, that is related to Queen Anne's lace. That would produce a kind of rusty red or orange, depending on your dyeing conditions. Then there is woad. Is, by the way, was not used to make a paint to put on people's skin, and it is not a hallucinogen. Anyway, woad is used for creating blue, but could also be overdyed with yellow to make a green. But it has to be fermented. It has to be mashed and fermented, and then you also have to use fermented urine to attain a lot of colors, actually. Weld or broom were used to make yellow. Saffron was used sometimes later in the medieval period, but not as often as people think it was, because saffron was also crazy expensive, and you need a lot of saffron to get a good yellow. And the saffron fades actually pretty badly, at least on linen it does. Kermes is the insect, a red insect that was used to make red, the crimson red. This shade of red would have been achieved with kermes, which is a louse that grows, that lives on trees, lives on a specific kind of oak tree in the Mediterranean. So this famous sort of 14th, 15th century red, some people call it Renaissance red, was attained through the kermes louse, and that's where the word crimson comes from. Kermes, keramisa, crimson. Let's see. Purple could actually be achieved no longer in this part of the Middle Ages with murex, but with lichen. There's a kind of lichen that you can actually, from which you can obtain a purple. You can also over dye blue with red to get a purple. You can get different shades by either using more or less dye stuff or doing exhaust baths, which means once you've done your main dyeing, the good fabric, and then you still have some dye stuff left in the pot, and it'll just make a less vibrant color, then you put a lower quality fabric into that, and that's what's called the exhaust dye bath. And that'll give you a paler shade. And in fact, probably most lower class people, their clothes were probably dyed with an exhaust dye bath. So, you know, the first round of dyeing, of course, goes to the expensive clothes bought by patrons with means and the place to wear such things. And then, you know, the exhaust bath probably was used to do secondary dyeing that would go towards people with less means. Let's see, trying to think what other common dye stuffs did I not mention? Indigo, weld, kermes. I mean, there's other Brazil wood for red also. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of, and depending on where you live, right, because your local ecology is different. So the plants you have locally available will determine, you know, what kind of dye stuffs you use to create your colors. Let's see. Yeah, exactly. So thank you, Lisa, for reminding me. Yeah. Most foods create dyes that don't last. They're called fugitive dyes. And she's right, which is why beets will stain your skin seemingly forever, but, you know, won't really actually hang around for very long. Let me see. I ended up doing a basic study into medieval textile production processes for Dungeons and Dragons back when I played a tailor. Yeah, and my husband is a big D&D guy. He does world building and pretty much only dungeon masters, and he uses all this stuff we learned from medieval living history in his universe, in his world. Yeah. Sometimes I wonder how we figured these things out, like fermented urine being a color activator, and the louse as a dye stuff. Is there a book recommendation for the background of historical clothing? About the creativity thing, I think humans are just naturally a curious species, and there's a lot of let's see what happens in human innovation. um, it's and it's like one innovation leads to another. Well, and maybe the first innovation in a stream of innovations is an accident. Like if I've ever told you the story of how I think pretzels were invented, and then that leads to other people going, well, if it does that on that object or that material, what if I apply it to this other thing? So I think there's just a lot of let's see what happens in human history. As for a book on the background of historical clothing, Nuclear Andal, could you specify your criteria a little more for me, and then I can give you a better answer. When you say a background of historical clothing. Sarah rightly asks, an exhaust bath, question mark, is that like a leftover dye? Exactly. That is exactly what an exhaust bath is. So once you've dyed the first round of clothing, of fabric, whatever, threads, yarn, whatever it is you're dyeing, then what's left is the exhaust bath, what's the leftover dye, and that will still dye. It will still create color, but it will create a much less vibrant, a much less saturated color. Let me see. Thank you. Walnut husk brown, iron skin for yellow, and iron for black. Yes, and actually oak galls also for black, um, which is part of the iron process. Which unfortunately, that's why we don't have almost any extant black textiles from the Middle Ages, because the process of making a black dye was basically oxidizing the fibers, and they literally rust away after not very long. So yeah, black dye was created, and usually by multiple dye baths to get that depth of black, which is why black became a fashionable color in the second half of the 15th century, because they kind of perfected the technique, and it became the color of the wealthy because you needed so many successive dye baths. It was expensive to do. Yeah. No, Sarah, do not apologize for your questions. Um, let me see. Never apologize for questions, anyone, and don't worry about dominating the field. Just let me go back here. I think the invention was of safe alcohol. I think the invention of safe alcohol production is way wackier. Yeah, it is. Nuclear is asking, like, on textile production, and is there a book that has information together for textile production through history? Okay, that's okay. Let me think about that. Textile production. So there is a series of books I can recommend. It's a series, a compilation of serious academic essays on the topic of medieval textiles, including textile production, but also clothing and whatnot. And that is, I think it's called Textiles and Clothing. Unfortunately, Mike Condottiero is not here to go to rush to our bookshelf and grab it. If anyone knows what I'm talking about, there's like, I don't know, 14 volumes now, 15 volumes. And they produce, there might even be more than that, very good collection, very in-depth. And each essay explores usually a pretty specific time and place or a specific subject. So you'll get a kind of much more interesting breadth of information than a more generalist book. In terms of generalist book on medieval clothing, on a historical textile production, I mean, I think there is a book called Textiles Through the Ages. Um, that's kind of more generalist. It depends on whether you want to get down into the nitty gritty with, information that you could actually use to recreate something, or if you're looking for a more general overview. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Gunpowder was invented in pursuit of longevity. Oh, the irony. Yeah. Yeah, it is. A lot of people don't realize that about the original invention of gunpowder. Yeah, they found it in that tomb. Yeah, as one of the, alchemists looking for the secret to eternal life. Yeah. There's so many ironies about the development of so many of the innovations that we have today, and how something that was meant to save us originally now is probably killing us en masse. Let me see. Any good history book relating to clothing making? Yeah. Well, yeah, well, yes, iron, I did say that iron literally corrodes the fabric because it's basically rusting it. But yeah, I mean, but also to create that level of black, to get that deep black, you really just had to do a lot of, you couldn't be just one dye bath. You actually had to do multiple dye baths to get that deep, really deep black, especially the thicker your fabric. Um, Yeah, immortality elixir go boom. Yep. Okay, so books, yeah, books, my book corner. Normally I do a book corner, and I am so sorry. I forgot when the condottiero was back to go and have him pull some books. I usually have on my, I have a couple of, I have several videos on books that I recommend on the channel, including the history of fashion and the history of textiles. Yeah, there is so much good stuff out there. I have a lot of it in foreign languages, of course, also. But yeah, the compendium on textiles and clothing and textiles. I think it's called Clothing and Textiles. Clothing and Textiles is a great series of books to have. I wish I had them all. I really do need to just get them all. Some of this stuff actually is available. Interestingly, the textiles, clothing and textiles is available, or medieval clothing and textiles is available on academia.edu. If you're not familiar with academia.edu as a website, check them out. There's a lot of things that have been published there, including whole books, especially when it comes to medieval textiles and textile production. There's also, for specifically for, because I never go very general. I always go pretty specific. Uh, that's why I'm having an issue, because I don't necessarily have a good suggestion on something that's general, except for medieval clothing and textiles, which is, as I said, a compendium of academic papers, journal papers, kind of over the years that are, it's really a useful read. Gosh darn. I'm not staring off at the distance. I'm literally looking at my bookshelf and hoping that it triggers some memory about more generalist textile and clothing, historical textile production. Because I've got books on extant finds, and I've got books on fashion in particular places. Hmm. Yeah, I would say I've probably learned the most about historical textile production in reading all those journal essays that are kept up in compendia, caught up in compendia like medieval clothing and textiles. Yeah. Sorry to dig in deeper. No problem. Deeper is good. How are the dyes created? Boiling the items you mentioned. Yeah, so it depends on the dye stuff. There are different procedures and processes for it. So if it's root, like madder, it's a root. Then you would actually mash it up in a mortar and pestle, and you would the way I do it anyway. I put it in a sachet, a cloth sachet, and tie that off. And then you put that in your dye pot. Then there's a certain like temperature that you have to do it at, and you want to make sure the pH level is just right. They didn't understand what pH was in the Middle Ages, but they understood how it worked, and they understood how to achieve it. They understood about alkali and acidic, and that your water needed to be a certain kind of way for it to work best. And yeah, you put it in your pot, you boil it. The heat is what helps extract it. There's also cold extraction processes. So it depends on the dye stuff. And it's honestly been so long since I've looked into dyeing that I've forgotten whether madder is a cold extraction or a hot extraction. And actually, whether you do hot or cold extraction will sometimes affect the color that you get from the dye stuff. And then you've got your pot of dye stuff from there, and then your fabric goes in the dye vat. In the case of woad, you again mortar and pestle it until it's a mush. You let it ferment, and you also let the urine ferment, which creates more ammonia, a better, more concentrated form of ammonia. And again, you end up, let me see, what did we do with that? I think we also put that in a sachet and put that in a dye pot. But for the most part, you're gonna mash it up, mash the thing up. Same thing with kermes. You're gonna grind it up, and you're going to extract the dye stuff. And then you're going to remove the actual dye stuff, because you don't want sediment from the original dye material to actually, and ask me why I know this, to end up creating patterns and splotches all over your fabric. Yeah, so there's whether it comes to a boil or whether it's just heated, it depends. The dyeing manuals actually will tell you kind of they obviously temperature as a gauge, centigrade and Fahrenheit, not a thing before the 17th century, but they did understand about degrees of heat and cold, and so they'll kind of give you an indication of how hot or cold you should make your dye bath to it be successful. Can you use ammonia with woad without urine? I mean, yeah, because I'm pretty certain that the main active thing from the fermented urine is the ammonia. So probably, I haven't done that though. I've only done the hardcore thing and used personally fermented urine. There's a multi-volume series of books usually found in university libraries on the history of fashion in Europe, and I believe the Orient. It contains colored plates. Can't think of the title. Well, the history of fashion, are you talking about, I think it's literally called The History of Costume, and I have it up there. It's a 2-book series that's out of print. We managed, is normally selling for like $500 now, but we managed to snag it from an A-Books vendor for like $50. Yeah. Yeah, so I'm pretty certain you can use ammonia with, just use the ammonia with the woad and not the urine. But why would you do that when you can feed your condottiero alcohol so that he makes strong urine, and then have him urinate into a bucket, and then have that bucket sit out and become a delightful smell? I mean, you know, oh, sorry guys. I think our secondary camera, because we're going on 3 hours now or more, I think our secondary camera just died. And actually, at that point, my butt is starting to go a little numb. Really, I thank you all. More like 20 volumes. No, then that's a different series altogether. So I'm going to let you last round of questions, so that I can actually restore the circulation to my derriere. I usually don't sit still for this long. I'm normally a stand up and stretch every 10 minutes kind of person. Yeah, but any last minute questions? And it was nuclear, right? Nuclear Andal. Yeah. I will make a good concerted effort to make sure I have a better list of more generalist books on historical fabric production for you. And I'll have that for the next time. And maybe I'll put up a community post about it. I promise. I really promise. I really am going to do it. Otherwise, I do have several videos on books I recommend for people who are interested in historical fashion, and those might be of use too. Otherwise, don't forget to hit that thumbs up, and please do leave an emoji in the comments under the video once it publishes, everyone. And tomorrow I'm joining Philip on Irish Medieval History to critique very severely the clothing that is found in the new 15th century game set in the era of the Hussite Wars, Kingdom Come: Deliverance II. They have done some good things to improve the clothes, and they've done some terrible things to the women's clothes. So join us over there tomorrow. That will be at 7 a.m. Korea time, which will be 5 p.m. New York City time on Saturday, and will be 10 p.m. in Ireland, I believe. So, yeah. Yeah, thank you all for joining me in these sewing circles. I'm good. They're becoming a weekly feature. For those of you who are Patreons and members, I am going to be starting live Zoom sessions where we will get together, and then you can actually show me what you're working on and we can actually talk. So that is a benefit of patronage and membership for those who are able to support me in a more direct financial fashion. But I appreciate everything you guys do for me. Even joining me here and just hitting that thumbs up and leaving a little emoji is great and plenty. Okay, everyone, I am going to restore the circulation to my butt now. And I look forward to seeing some of you tomorrow, maybe in my collaboration with Philip on Irish Medieval History, or next week. Okay, everyone, until then, stay creative. Thank you. Bye. Oh my God, my butt hurts so much. Oh God, the microphone's still on. Oh, egads. Stretch in front of the camera. This is what you all do to me. Ah.